Chapter 5:18. In the blink of an eye, the icy mist transformed into a gigantic drill, ferociously drilling into the purple mist. Even though the nightmare realm was not dispelled, the Li Yuan icy mist had successfully infiltrated it. Angus Jeffrey's expression softened slightly. Dake's expression turned grave. There was a clear disparity in the control of the field between the two elves. The nightmare realm was truly too profound. The dream demon was still at the stage of adapting to the field, and had yet to reach the stage of controlling the field. But the Li Yuan misty demon's control over the icy mist was like an extension of its arm. When it followed Jeffrey's request and executed the misty beheading technique, its control over the icy mist was raised to the upper limit. After the icy mist drilled into the nightmare realm, it abruptly exploded. Then, a faint blue icy mist appeared within the purple mist. Relying on the misty body to blend into the mist, the Li Yuan misty demon was like a fish shuttling through the mist. Even the dream demon was unable to capture its traces. When the dream demon hurriedly turned its head to search for traces of the Li Yuan misty demon, the icy mist that floated behind its neck suddenly congealed into a sharp ice blade, carrying a chilling aura as it sliced through the back of its neck. Remember in a second. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. The dream demon's head and body were separated in that split second. But when Angus Jeffrey's eyes revealed a look of surprise, the dream demon's head suddenly turned into mist. It was actually an illusion. Wanting to hit the dream demon in the nightmare realm? Unless one had an ability like the true dragon's eye that allowed one to see the truth. The ice blade congealed from the icy mist instantly melted, and the Li Yuan misty demon once again hid within the icy mist. Its original speed was extremely fast, but it was unable to move normally within the nightmare realm. Only by completely transforming into an icy mist would it be able to break free from the nightmare realm's restraints. After its technique failed, it started to look for an opportunity. Angus Jeffrey, on the other hand, had successfully activated the venue card, Frigid Lands of Departure. Combining the Fog Demon's field skill with this field card will definitely be able to dispel the illusion. Once this place is dispelled, Dake's magic elf will lose its hiding place. Angus Jeffrey abruptly raised the frigid earth of Liyuan high in the air. The blue light emitted from the card penetrated the layers of icy mist and shone directly on the ground. The layer of ice on the ground thickened under the effect of the Liyuan frozen earth, and spread from the blue summoning area all the way to the red area. Liyuan frozen earth and Liyuan icy mist complemented each other, and the effect was even better when the two were combined. The cold wind whistled, and the temperature of the arena dropped rapidly. The blue half of the zone had become the home ground of the ice element. As for the purple smoke in the red team's half, it was finally defeated by the combination of the frost and ice mist. It was constantly being forced back to the red team's summoning area. But in reality, the smoke was just an external effect of the nightmare realm. The territory it occupied did not shrink in the slightest. It was just that the Liyuan frozen earth and Liyuan icy mist did corrode the nightmare realm. Under the support of the Liyuan frozen earth, the three attributes of the Liyuan fog demon also received an overall boost. It cruised in the fog, quickly searching for the dream demon's true location. The countdown for the second phase was decreasing by the second. Angus Jeffrey once again summoned a magic card, Crystal Guard, and used a hexagonal crystal barrier to surround the blue magic sphere. Although it obstructed the movement of the magic sphere, it also provided it with a necessary protection. As for himself, the moment the icy mist drifted into the red team's summoning area, he abruptly issued a command, Fog Beheading, Target, Red Magic Sphere. The front part of the icy mist instantly condensed into a sharp ice blade, silently slashing towards the magic-conducting ball in the red team's summoning zone. This sudden attack was extremely fatal. Dake wanted to release his magic power to deflect the magic sphere, but it was already too late. But to everyone's surprise, the ice blade actually sliced through the magic-conducting ball's body. Then, the red magic-conducting ball shattered into a mirage just like the dream demon. Angus Jeffrey's expression suddenly froze. He suddenly realized that before the nightmare realm was completely dispelled, or before the dream demon was destroyed, it would be extremely difficult for him to pinpoint the location of the red magic sphere. And such a degree of illusion transformation, to the dream demon, was simply a piece of cake. The essence of the so-called confusion tactic was to create illusions, to confuse the opponent between reality and illusion, and to make them unable to attack. The ice surface created by the Liyuan frozen earth had already invaded more than half of the red team's summoning area. A faint blue icy mist disturbed the nightmare realm. But it was all useless. Angus Jeffrey urgently thought of a way to deal with it, his forehead dripping with cold sweat. Dake used this period of time to completely calm down the effects of the sharp pain in his chest. He calmly touched the deck, waiting for the next turn, and suddenly drew a card. Magical Beast, Ever-Changing Monster. Ball Sea Lion, Ever-Changing Monster and Ball Sea Lion? Ever-Changing Monster can transform into a two-legged humanoid to meet the luminous envoy's requirement. Ball Sea Lion contains Bliss Factor. It can use the Moon God's Soul Eye to evolve into a Moon God. The former is difficult to use because the ever-changing monster only has 100 MP. The latter is enough to break through this situation. Dake's brain was rapidly working. He originally wanted to evolve the little demon beast into a Heidi Road beast, then evolve it. But with the Ball Sea Lion in his hands, he no longer needed it. Without hesitation, after his thoughts cleared, Dake immediately started summoning. Dream Demon. Mayo, with just a reminder, the Dream Demon, seemed to have telepathy as it responded to Dake's request. 3 seconds later, the summoning light released from the spherical sea lion card fell into the nightmare realm. All of a sudden, numerous icy mists came from all directions and surrounded the spot where the summoning light was going to land. However, nothing appeared in the summoning light. The Ball Sea Lion's true summoning position was above, and before it appeared, it was shrouded in an illusion. The Dream Demon hugged the Orb Sea Lion in her arms and flew freely in the nightmare realm. She even used a tentacle to drag the red magic ball behind her, looking like a baby carrier. Seeing that the Ball Sea Lion was safe, Dake immediately started summoning the Moon God's Soul Eye after the cooldown ended. At the blue side summoning area, a new summoning array appeared. After Angus Jeffrey drew out 2 new magic cards, his face lit up with joy. He immediately summoned a 4-star magic guide sprite, Liyuan Ice Essence. On the Liyuan Frozen Earth, any ice-type sprite that wasn't higher than the 2nd tier could be summoned. Furthermore, the Liyuan Ice Essence still had the ultimate skill, Ice Heart. When it appeared in the blue side summoning area, the surrounding dense ice elements were continuously absorbed into its body. The Liyuan Ice Essence, that was originally a snowflake, started to grow rapidly. From the core of the snowflake, countless ice thorns sprouted out, intertwining into a gigantic ice ball. And its magic power value also continued to rise from the initial 1,000 points. It would only take 10 seconds for it to reach the upper limit of 3,000 points of magic power. Its size would also expand to 3 meters. Doc had a deep impression of this magic guide elf that was a pure spellcaster. Whether it was Blizzard, Icicle Spear Array, or Freezing Ray, they were all ice attribute sure kill skills. Although the Dream Demon had concealed its figure in the Nightmare Realm, its physical body still existed. It would still be attacked by the area ultimate skills. Furthermore, the ability to create illusions would consume a large amount of MP. Angus Jeffrey must have determined that the Dream Demon didn't have much MP left, and wanted to use a large area of effect magic to kill it. Once the Dream Demon revealed a trace in the Nightmare Realm, the Liyuan Fog Demon's fog beheading technique would swiftly follow up. After summoning the Liyuan Ice Essence, Angus Jeffrey didn't stop. After activating the next magic guide card, in the blue side summoning area, an icy obelisk was erected. That obelisk was 5 to 6 meters tall. The top of the obelisk even reached the height of the contestant stage. For a moment, one couldn't tell if it was a magic guide sprite, or a tool or magic. Dake's knowledge didn't contain any information about this obelisk, thus it was hard to guess. But his summoning had already been completed. Gather your prayers and become a new silver moon. Transform into a shining silver moon, armed evolution, Moon God. The image of the Moon God's spirit appeared behind the Ball Sea Lion, opening its arms to embrace it. The dream demon quietly retreated. The illusion that was cast on the ball sea lion was instantly broken by the dense power of the moon god. The ball sea lioness body appeared in front of everyone for the first time. But in an instant, a huge silver mirror appeared behind the image of the moon god spirit, releasing a strong light that instantly surrounded the ball sea lion's body. It continuously penetrated into it, allowing it to obtain a temporary evolution ability. Under the brilliance of the silver moon, the life form of the ball sea lion underwent a drastic change. From the appearance of a small sea lion, it gradually stretched into a slender human form. With a clear gender, after evolving, it presented a body shape similar to that of a woman. The lips and chin that were exposed from the purple mask were sensual and delicate. When the silver armor appeared one by one around its body, it immediately opened its arms and began to wear it. The silver armor was tightly attached to its graceful curves, perfectly displaying the contours of its torso. The mask on its head and the cylindrical sensors on its ears formed a V-shaped structure. The silver mirror flew to its chest and shrunk into a heart protection mirror with mysterious runes. M.O. The ball sea lion let out an excited cry. Although this was not the first time it had undergone armed evolution, each attempt brought a new feeling to it. The carefree feeling of evolving in all aspects was endless no matter how many times it experienced it. Through this evolution, it could slightly make up for its regret of not being able to evolve into the West Lion Siren. Of course, in the current environment, it wasn't a good time to think about this. Its slender eyes suddenly became focused. At this moment, the ball sea lion had completely evolved into the moon god. The powerful aura of the 6-star magic guide fairy quickly spread out. Under the buff of the passive skill, divine personality armament, the moon god not only had its hypostasis increased, but it was also immune to most directional and shape-shifting sure-kill skills. Its magic attack and defense had both increased by 1,000 points. This caused the 6-star magic guide fairy's magic attack and defense to reach a terrifying value of 4,000 points. Obviously, this was the value that only a perfect 8-star magic guide fairy could have. It relied on the floating ability of the armor to float in the air, and its slender limbs glowed with a faint silver light like moonlight. Its gaze swept across the ice mist under its feet as if it was looking down on the world. Just like how the dream demon's physical body didn't disappear, even though the Liyuan fog demon had merged into the ice mist, its body still existed in the mist and would be attacked by area-type sure-kill skills. The dream demon also had an area-type sure-kill skill. However, although the moonlight, summoned by lunar eclipse, was thick, unless all 12 moonlight were summoned at the same time, its range wouldn't be enough. Therefore, it needed to lure the Liyuan fog demon out. However, while the moon god was thinking about this, Dake pointed out another path. Attack the magic guide ball. The Liyuan fog demon was hiding in the ice mist and was difficult to capture, while the Liyuan ice essence was absorbing the ice element and growing rapidly. Attacking the magic guide ball was the best way to break the situation. Unlike the red magic guide ball that was hidden by illusions, the blue magic guide ball was only protected by a layer of crystal guardian. No matter what kind of magic it was, it couldn't block the moon goddess attack. The thing that needed to be paid attention to was the obelisk that had an unknown function. In the blink of an eye, half of the third round had passed. The tip of the moon god's foot tapped, and the air rippled like water. Then, it rose up and left the Nightmare Realm's area of effect. Once it left the Nightmare Realm, the sluggish feeling of walking in a quagmire instantly disappeared. Its body was as light as a swallow, and its whole body was filled with a sense of condensed power. Without any gap, the moon god instantly sprinted towards the blue half. Its body almost turned into a beam of silver light. The Liyuan ice essence was accumulating power to cast Blizzard. When it suddenly heard Angus Jeffrey's shout, it immediately switched to Freezing Ray. Its body slightly rotated, and the icy blue ray shot upwards. The ray formed an arc as it moved, blocking the air. However, its activation speed was still a beat slower. The moon god had already appeared behind it. It didn't use any sure-kill skills. The moon goddess' fingers closed together and turned into a hand blade. As it turned, it slashed out. Only a crash sound was heard. The Liyuan ice essence's body was instantly split apart. Then, it let out a hurried long cry. Countless amounts of icy mist suddenly erupted, rolling back towards the blue team's half. The Liyuan fog demon that was hiding in it returned to the blue half with the ice fog, then exposed its body and desperately accelerated. But at this time, the moon god had already slashed the Liyuan ice essence a second time. It formed across and cut the Liyuan ice essence into 4 parts. Its body then exploded into magic starlight. However, the starlight scattered and was absorbed by the obelisk. The moon god glanced at it. After that, it didn't even pay attention to the Liyuan fog demon that was desperately rushing back. It raised its right hand, and a beam of moonlight shot into the sky from its fingertip. The sky suddenly lit up with a silver brilliance. Then, a clear beam of moonlight suddenly fell, and with the force of a thunderbolt, it blasted on the crystal guardian. Boom! There was an explosion. It completely covered the ticking sound of the turn change. The crystal guardian actually cracked open. Then, the second moonlight fell straight down. Under the control of the moon god, the moonlight that was slightly condensed and as thick as a bucket once again blasted on the crystal barrier. Boom! The crystal barrier was completely shattered, and the broken magic was also absorbed into the obelisk. Get up! Angus Jeffrey, who was in the middle of the blue team's platform, suddenly roared. The 2 new cards of the 4th round had not been obtained yet, so he concentrated on the output of magic and control. The blue magic conducting ball instantly sprung up and moved horizontally, instantly dodging the 3rd beam of moonlight. The moon god instantly narrowed its eyes, and with a tap of its toes, its right hand slashed at the magic ball like a knife. In the sky above, the remaining 9 beams of moonlight lost control and fell rapidly like meteors, continuously bombarding the blue half of the region. Countless ice fog was blasted away, and the ice formed by the Liyuan frozen earth on the ground also cracked layer by layer. The effect of the arena was affected because of this. The Liyuan fog demon that hurriedly returned took a moonlight that poured down on its head. Its weak defense of only 1,000 points was completely unable to resist the moonlight's bombardment. Although it used body of fog to merge into the ice fog at the critical moment, it still could not escape the moonlight's damage. In just a few seconds, it was literally blasted into pieces. The moon god did not even look at it. Then, under the pressure of the moon god, the blue magic ball finally could not avoid the moonlight's bombardment. A huge beam of light suddenly blasted down, and the magic power that Angus Jeffrey infused on it was blasted away. Ah! In that instant, Angus Jeffrey suffered a huge amount of damage, causing him to let out a blood-curdling scream. However, the grey flame on its forehead suddenly jumped up, and it actually made it reach out to the deck while trembling. With 2 new magic cards in hand, it began to summon in an extremely strange state. A cloud of magic suddenly surged out from the ground and drilled into the blue magic ball. The vitality enchantment that was originally on the verge of shattering was repaired. The health points that had fallen below half were restored to more than half. However, the moon goddess attack immediately shattered the vitality enchantment again. Ah! Angus Jeffrey let out another shrill scream. His face contorted intensely because of this. The excruciating pain caused by the 2 consecutive attacks on the magic conducting ball made him tremble all over. How could the son of a count, who had never experienced physical pain since he was born, withstand this bone-piercing pain? In extreme pain, his gaze shone on the red contestant's platform opposite him. At this time, Dake had also taken out 2 new magic cards. He held one of the magic cards in his hand, and his lips moved quickly. Then, a new summoning light lit up in the red contestant's summoning circle. What appeared in the summoning circle was the giant dragon egg that once gave Angus Jeffrey nightmares. In the name of Angus Jeffrey, I summon the magic. The situation quickly took a turn for the worse. But this was the charm of a magic duel. From one moment to the next, victory or defeat was only a flip of the palm. Angus Jeffrey's face was distorted by the pain, but he still managed to control the magic ball from a distance and summon the magic card at the same time. This was a domain that he had always been unable to break through, but now he had achieved it, unconsciously. When the blue magic ball dragged the shattered vitality enchantment away from the moon goddess attack again, a second obelisk rose from the ground between the blue magic ball and the moon god, blocking the moon god that wanted to chase up. At this time in the arena, the Nightmare Realm occupied the red half of the arena. The Dream Demon brought the red magic ball and hid within. The giant dragon egg appeared in the red side summoning circle, shaking slightly. In the blue half of the arena, there was only the shattered ice surface and the floating ice fog that had yet to disperse. This meant that the arena effect had not completely disappeared. Angus Jeffrey no longer had a magic elf. There were only 2 obelisks erected in 2 different directions. The first obelisk that was summoned was attacked by a beam of moonlight, and there were already cracks on the wall. The black light that was originally emitted from absorbing the magic power of the dead magic fairy had once again withered. It was probably this obelisk that repaired the blue magic ball's vitality enchantment that was on the verge of shattering. After repairing the vitality enchantment, there was still magic power left inside, but it was obviously not much. Dake did not think that the obelisk's effect was only to repair the vitality enchantment of the magic ball, so he did not let down his guard. The second obelisk that rose from the ground had a subtle difference in appearance from the first one. But the aura that both emitted was the same, filthy and evil. Ha, ha, ha. Angus Jeffrey slightly recovered. His painful expression was not exposed under the cover of the dual domain. The arrogant attitude of looking down on others with his nostrils had completely collapsed. His bloodshot eyes were filled with viciousness and hatred. Dake did not know why this person hated him so much. He could only attribute it to the influence of the grey flame. In short, after revealing a fierce gaze, Angus Jeffrey slowly spat out 4 words from his mouth. Underworld shackles. Then, grey flames suddenly emerged from the 2 obelisks. The grey flames at the edge of the field seemed to have resonated with it and suddenly burned fiercely. The chaotic light of the flames was reflected in the field, causing shadows to crisscross. The grey flames that emerged from the 2 obelisks quickly condensed into the shape of chains. The moon god, who was in between the 2 obelisks, felt an extremely strong binding force before the chains shot out. Its movement speed became sluggish because of this. Whoosh! Whoosh! In that instant, the chains condensed from grey flames flew out from the 2 obelisks. Like a snake, they quickly wrapped around the moon god's hands and spiraled upwards, entangling its body. Then, the 2 grey chains suddenly tightened, binding the slender moon god in the air. Angus Jeffrey stared at the tied-up moon god until he was sure that it couldn't break free after trying to struggle. Then, he suddenly let out a maniacal laugh. Ka-cha-cha! The huge dragon egg in the red summoning area suddenly cracked open, and the green-eyed baby dragon broke out of the shell. Angus Jeffrey's expression suddenly froze. But at the edge of his vision, he suddenly saw the figure of the Dream Demon appear at the edge of the Nightmare Realm. Then, this ghost-like 5-star magic guide sprite rushed out of the Nightmare Realm and flew towards the blue magic guide ball. The Dream Demon's floating speed was not fast or slow, but it was more than enough to catch up to the magic guide ball. Angus Jeffrey hurriedly injected his magic power, controlling the magic guide ball to circle around the 2 obelisks. The magic power in the moon god's body flowed along the 2 grey chains into the 2 obelisks. The black light in the obelisks once again shone. When the Dream Demon chased over, the top of the second obelisk condensed a black ball of light. That ball of light instantly turned into a pitch-black ray of light, hitting the Dream Demon who wasn't too prepared. Me! The Dream Demon let out a shrill shriek and subconsciously retreated back into the Nightmare Realm. Its magic power was instantly depleted by this attack. Dake's eyes revealed a look of shock. He carefully observed the structure of the 2 obelisks. When the black ball of light condensed, it seemed like the black light had spread to the moon god's body. Obviously, the power of the black ray originated from the moon god. Not only can it absorb the magic power of a dead magic guide spirit, it can also create chains to bind the opponent, and absorb the opponent's magic power to attack and heal. What is the origin of these 2 obelisks? Dake's heart sank, giving the order to release the light spirit hall to the cyanide WYRM that broke out of its shell. The light spirit hall and the nightmare realm did not conflict. As a field skill released by a magic guide spirit refined by the same magus, they would not repel each other. But the frozen plains desert would be expelled by the light spirit hall. The two field skills were enough to suppress it. Roar! The cyanide WYRM raised its head. From its dragon wings suddenly erupted a holy white light, converging into a blazing ball of light like the sun. The snow-like feathers of light sprinkled down from the sky. The frozen plains desert that invaded the red half of the ice surface was quickly melted by the warm white light. Then, the white light invaded the blue team's territory, quickly melting the frozen soil that was already broken apart. Seeing that the field effect of the frozen plains desert was about to disappear, Angus Jeffrey's pupils shrank. He continued to control the magic guide ball while casting a new summoning spell. The other magic guide card in his hand lit up. The giant demon of Liyuan, that could be specially summoned on the frozen plains desert, once again stepped onto the stage of the duel. This 4-meter-tall, 5-star magic guide spirit with long snowy white hair and scarlet eyes like a giant ape had a strength that was not inferior to the dream demon. Each of its 3 sure-kill skills was useful. This was especially true for the undead curse, which could weaken, stiffen, and slow down the magic elf it killed. It was the equivalent of crippling a magic elf. In the previous duel, Dake relied on the dragon egg transformation of the young cyanide WYRM to disperse the effect of the undead curse. This time, of course, he could use the same strategy. The only thing he needed to pay attention to was whether the obelisk could release a second black light. From the fact that it was still absorbing the magic of the moon god, this was extremely possible. Dake's brain was working very quickly. Although the dream demon's magic was almost depleted, it was actually an extremely good situation for it. It was just that in Angus Jeffrey's field, there was no opponent worthy of it sharing its life with. After the young cyanide WYRM released the Hall of Light, there was no need to be afraid. Even if the obelisk could release a second black light, it would be useless. Therefore, after thinking, he immediately let the young cyanide WYRM attack the obelisk. The goal was to destroy it. From the cracks on the first obelisk, it could be seen that both obelisks could be destroyed. The ability to bind the moon god obviously required both obelisks to exist at the same time. As long as the first obelisk that was damaged was destroyed, the moon god would be able to break free. These were the most basic considerations. Although the young cyanide WYRM did not particularly understand Dake's command, it still took a step forward. It carefully went around the edge of the field and charged towards the obelisk. The dream demon purposely opened up a small path for it. But when it charged towards the first obelisk, the giant fiend of Liyuan also roared and charged towards it under Angus Jeffrey's command. But at this time, the frozen ground of Liyuan's field effect had completely disappeared. Relying on the giant fiend of Liyuan's 2,500 points of attack, it was already unable to break through the young cyanide WYRM's dragon scales. Instead, the young cyanide WYRM that had 3,000 points of attack knocked the giant fiend of Liyuan, which only had 1,200 points of defense, away in an instant. The giant fiend of Liyuan's body fiercely crashed into the first obelisk, but it immediately stood up and released the hibernation freezing air towards the young cyanide WYRM. The freezing air that had a hypnotic effect instantly sprayed out. The cyanide baby dragon had already been hit by the hibernation freezing air, but it still charged forward and was hit by the hibernation freezing air. But before it was hypnotized, it took the initiative to use the dragon's reverse scale, using its anger to wash away its sleepiness. This scene was like a repeat of the previous duel. The young cyanide WYRM's attack power was greatly increased because of this, but its mind fell into a chaotic state after going berserk. It did not hesitate to launch an attack on the nearest unit. The giant fiend of Liyuan was once again smashed into dust. Then, as expected, the undead curse was triggered. A ball of pitch-black magic with a ghost-like howl drilled into the face of the young cyanide WYRM, causing its body to instantly stiffen. From inside to outside, it emerged a deathly pale color like a corpse. It was as if it had turned into a zombie. Dake picked up the Pride 2 in his hand. This was the other magic card that he had drawn in this round. Using the low-level Great Sin card, to let the young Scion IWYRM escape from its chaotic state and obtain a moment of clarity, then immediately cast the Dragon Egg transformation. This was the strategy that Dake had used before. The young Scion IWYRM also very smoothly turned back into a Dragon Egg. However, this time, Dake no longer had the Pride 3 in his hand, so he could not let it hatch into the young Scion IWYRM Sin. However, the 30-second countdown of the fourth round had ended, and both players could draw 2 more magic cards. However, at the moment when the round changed, the top of the second obelisk once again condensed into a black ball of light, and then fiercely shot out a pitch-black ray of light. The first Dragon Egg that could not move was immediately hit. A mere 3-star Dragon Egg could not withstand the attack of this ray of light at all, and it was instantly shattered into pieces. Angus Jeffrey's laughter rang out after that. "Do you think that I will be fooled by the same trick twice?" His voice seemed to be hoarse because of the continuous pain, but the pride in his tone could not be hidden no matter how hard he tried. However, the angry response that he was expecting did not appear. Dake Dimming was still extremely calm as he stretched out his hand to draw a card. During this process, the first Dragon Egg that should have been turned into magic and then absorbed by the obelisk did not disappear. The white light that had already illuminated the blue half of the area exuded a faint warmth. The body of the first Dragon Egg recondensed. Although its body was slightly transparent, it seemed to be intact. Hall of Light. The young Scion Eye Dragon offers a prayer, summoning the Hall of Light to descend. The light elemental magic fairy that dies in the Hall of Light will be reborn in the form of a spirit. The duration of the Hall of Light is 3 minutes. The duration of the spirit is 3 minutes, and it will not be affected by the disappearance of the Hall of Light. Due to the fact that not a single one of Dark's light elves had died in the Hall of Light during the last duel, Angus Jeffrey was still in the dark about the effects of this place. When he finally realized the problem, the situation was already desperate. Once the young Scion IWYRM hatched from this spirit dragon egg, the obelisk in front of it would not be able to withstand the full blow of the young dragon. And if this obelisk were to shatter, then the moon god would be able to escape as Dark had expected. At that time, he would no longer have the power to reverse the situation. Unless the grey flame on his forehead burned more and more fiercely. Angus Jeffrey took out 2 magic cards from the deck and put them into his hand. Then he suddenly opened them. Frost Emperor, Frost Scepter. Angus Jeffrey's eyebrows were filled with joy, and his lips almost immediately squirmed. His magic power was mobilized at a speed and stability that had never been seen before. When the spirit, young Scion IWYRM, hatched from the dragon egg, it was slightly late by half a second, and Angus Jeffrey's sacrificial summoning spell was successfully completed. In the arena, the grey flame on the 2 obelisks suddenly flickered violently. The obelisks that would not be ignited by the grey flame began to burn from the bottom. The 2 obelisks burned at the same time, and the flames that rushed up reflected the entire arena red. The nobles in the circular corridor subconsciously wanted to retreat, but after the flames reflected on their faces, there was no heat produced. "It's actually the cold flame." With shock and curiosity, the audience could not help but hold their breaths and stare at the arena, as if they were afraid of missing any frame. The grey flame mixed with the red flame flickered wildly, and the obelisks turned into powder at a speed visible to the naked eye. Grey light drilled out from the 2 obelisks at the same time, and merged with the white light released by the Frost Emperor in Angus Jeffrey's hand, forming a sacrificial summoning circle burning with grey flames. And with the sacrifice of the 2 obelisks at the same time, the 2 chains condensed by grey flames also lost their effectiveness. The moon god, that was tied up in the air, suddenly broke free from the chains. Although it did not have much magic power left, it was still alive. If it wanted to, it could summon the Moon Palace at this time and immediately recover 1/3 of its magic power. But that kind of indiscriminate healing would always bring about changes. After a short moment of thought, It gave up on the summoning and slowly fell from the air to the ground. It was very tired and weak. Then, above the sky, a huge black shadow shrouded over it. What jumped out from the sacrificial summoning circle was the emperor penguin that was as huge as a hill. It jumped from the sky, and its huge body carried a terrifying weight, with an aura that could crush everything. Spread out. When Dake reminded them, the cyanide baby dragon and moon god that were in the blue summoning area quickly retreated. Boom! The Frost Emperor stepped heavily on the ground, and the whole arena shook because of it. Card name, Frost Emperor. Type, Elf card, level, race, bird beast. Attribute, Ice, magic power, 4000, attack, 3500, defense, 4000, ultimate skill, Emperor's Fat, Ice Throne, Emperor's Hibernation. Although it was not a gold card, this 8-star Frost Emperor was the magic elf that Angus Jeffrey was most proud of after spending a lot of effort to refine. Whether it was in the past or now, once he summoned this magic elf, he had never failed. The higher the star level of the magic elf, the lower the probability of its 3 attributes reaching the top values. But this Frost Emperor's magic power and defense had reached perfection at the same time, and its 3500 attack was definitely not low. Just by relying on these terrifying attributes, it could allow it to gallop in front of an ordinary 8-star magic elf. Moreover, its 3 ultimate skills were very powerful. Among them, the core ultimate skill was Emperor's Fat, which could reduce the damage received in battle like Cat Boss Fur Coat. It was just that Cat Boss's Fur Coat could reduce the damage received by half, and Frost Emperor's Fat could only reduce the damage received by 30%. However, with its terrifying defense of 4000, even a 5700 attack could not break through its thick fat. If it was combined with the Frost Scepter, that could increase the effect of the Ice-type ultimate skills by 50%, it could make this Frost Emperor essentially invincible. Even if the Frost Emperor's defense was accidentally broken through, its other ultimate skill, Emperor's Hibernation, could allow it to quickly enter a hibernation state and quickly recover its magic power in its sleep. The effect of Emperor's Hibernation was very similar to Snorlax's sleep. It could instantly dispel all abnormal statuses and recover 20% of its magic power every 10 seconds for a total of 60 seconds. This meant that it could recover 120% of its magic power. Although it could only passively take a beating during the 60 seconds of hibernation, as long as it swallowed the magic ball into its body, it did not have to worry about the magic ball being broken. As for the last ultimate skill, Frost Throne, it was a skill that did not match its name. It summoned an ice mountain to kill the opponent. The ice mountain as large as a throne would fall from the sky and kill all the enemies that came to invade. After successfully summoning the Frost Emperor, Angus Jeffrey's entire state changed. He suddenly opened his arms and mocked, "Although the process is a little bumpy, the final result will never change. The strong will always be strong, and the weak will always be weak. No matter what era the duel is in, it needs a strong person like me, not weaklings like you who don't even have the most basic respect." Dake patiently listened to his words and suddenly said, "Is the duel in your era about fists to flesh and swords to slash each other? How is that possible? That's what a boorish man would do." Angus Jeffrey suddenly paused, and his face revealed a look of shock that even he did not know why. Dake suddenly shouted, "Moon God!" The moon god, that had just left the range of the Frost Emperor's fall, instantly adjusted its posture and turned into moonlight. Its 5 fingers formed a knife hand and slashed at the Frost Emperor's short leg. However, when its knife hand broke through, its expression changed instantly. It felt a soft force surround the side of its hand, and it could not continue to stab in. The moon god immediately retreated after its attack failed. As for Dark, he had a clearer understanding of the defenses of this 8-star magic guide fairy. He glanced at the 2 magic cards that he had just obtained and decided to summon them. However, Angus Jeffrey suddenly roared hysterically, "Frost Emperor, summon the throne." The huge fat penguin immediately opened its sharp beak and let out a long cry at the sky. Beep. The moment it raised its head and opened its mouth, it revealed a mouthful of densely packed sharp teeth. Coupled with its bright red mouth, it was frightening. Above the sky, as countless cold air surged, a huge whirlpool was formed. From the whirlpool of ice, a huge iceberg with a diameter of more than 10 meters slowly descended, emitting a soul-stirring cold air. The audience in the circular corridor instantly went into an uproar, and some people had already begun to retreat. When the huge iceberg completely appeared, even the referee and commentator on the platform could not help but shrink their necks. Then, the Frost Emperor let out a sharp cry again, and the huge iceberg actually slightly adjusted its direction and slammed down on the red side of the arena. Demon Mimi, the Dream Demon, did not panic even when its magic power was almost depleted. It immediately dragged the red magic ball and slipped to the edge of the arena. The baby blue-eyed dragon and moon god stepped out of the nightmare realm and ran to the sides of the arena to dodge. Boom! A thunderous sound was heard, and the earth trembled. The huge iceberg fell to the ground and let out an even more terrifying explosion sound. The ice shards at the bottom of the iceberg that were shattered by the impact shot out in all directions under the Frost Emperor's intentional control, almost covering the entire area of the nightmare realm. The Dream Demon twisted its body and entered its spirit state. Numerous ice shards pierced through its body, and the remaining frost effect was unable to break through its defense. But suddenly, it discovered that an ice shard was shooting towards the magic ball. It subconsciously transformed into its physical body and blocked the ice shard's attack. Its magic power, which wasn't much to begin with, had truly fallen to the lowest point. Beep. The sound caused by the iceberg had not yet subsided, and the fat emperor penguin actually took a step forward with its short legs and charged towards the red side of the arena. Although its speed did not seem to be fast, because of its large strides, its movement speed was not considered slow. Every step it took caused the ground to tremble. When it approached the nightmare realm, it suddenly lowered its body, and its right wing was like a huge blade, sweeping towards the nightmare realm. But the wing naturally swept through the air. Meow, looks like a little girl who isn't too smart. Meow Meow, that was summoned out of the red side summoning area, pinched its chin and observed the meat mountain. As for why its master summoned it, it was very clear. At the same time, it felt a trace of excitement in its heart. Remove the nightmare realm. Dake's faint voice transmitted from above. Currently, the nightmare realm had become an obstacle for the red side. Once the Frost Emperor stepped in, it would very likely be accelerated. But it seems like Angus Jeffrey did not realize the reality of the nightmare realm from the start, and only treated it as an illusion that could slow down one's speed. The Frost Emperor was only probing from the periphery. A blue light suddenly flashed on the blue side's platform, and an icy blue scepter descended like a meteor. The Frost Emperor extended its wings and swept the frost scepter into its wings. Instantly, icy blue ripples frantically spread out. After obtaining the frost scepter, not only could the Frost Emperor obtain the effects and strength of its ice-type ultimate skills, it could also refresh the cooldown of one of its ultimate skills. It raised the scepter that was extremely small in comparison to its body, and prepared to release the frozen throne into the nightmare realm once again. But suddenly, it heard a cry, and discovered that the purple fog had automatically dispersed. The red side was no longer obstructed. Then, a tiny gray cat madly dashed towards it. Facing such an ant-like creature, it was too lazy to pay attention to it. Its sharp eyes turned towards the Dream Demon and the magic sphere behind it. But at this moment, the Dream Demon widened its eyes at it. The 3 gems on its chest emitted a glaring red light. A ray of energy shot out from its body, penetrating through the Frost Emperor's thick fat, and connected it to the Frost Emperor's life. Then, the kind and gentle Dream Demon and the Frost Emperor shared the pain equally. The remaining HP, mana, of both parties were added together and divided equally. As the mana flowed into its body, the Dream Demon instantly let out a carefree cry. After the Frost Emperor was stunned for a moment, it suddenly raised its head and roared angrily. But no matter how angry it was, it couldn't stop the loss of HP. Originally, the mana that was used to release the Frozen Throne was now less than 2,000 points after being divided equally with the Dream Demon's mana. An unprecedented feeling of emptiness instantly filled its heart. Angus Jeffrey, who was constantly paying attention to the Frost Emperor card, also frowned at this moment. However, Dake Dimeng had never let the Dream Demon use the ultimate skill pain sharing in public, so no matter how hard he racked his brains, it was impossible for him to figure out the mystery within such a short period of time. On the contrary, after a few seconds of thinking, he suddenly turned his eyes and saw the Frost Scepter in the Frost Emperor's hand suddenly disappear into thin air. The shock that occurred in that instant caused panic to emerge in his heart. A ray of white light suddenly fell. Meow Meow, who had stolen the Frost Scepter, held the Frost Scepter in its right hand and the ray of white light in its left hand. A gun-shaped driver appeared in its left hand. When Angus Jeffrey saw this scene, he slammed the table almost without pause and roared, "Frost Emperor, stomp it to death!" Meow. The moment the magic gun was in its hand, Meow Meow had already retreated like lightning. The young green-eyed dragon that heard the command went past it and fiercely crashed into the huge fat penguin. Boom! The young green-eyed dragon's full strength was fiercely rebounded by the Frost Emperor's fat. It sat on the ground and felt dizzy, but it also successfully blocked the Frost Emperor's pursuit of Meow Meow. And Meow Meow, who pulled away, did not hesitate to inject mana into the magic gun. As the mana was injected, the top of the magic gun was condensed and a light emblem engraved with a six-pointed star appeared. Then, it aimed at the empty space in front and excitedly pressed the trigger. Bang! The light emblem that instantly shot out rolled on the ground at high speed and drew a huge six-pointed star magic circle. Then, the magic gun, that was the driver, disappeared. A huge red robot that looked like it was burning with flames floated out of the hexagram magic array. What is that? Whether it was the commentator on the platform, the audience in the circular corridor, or even Angus Jeffrey on the contestant platform, they all looked at the 6-meter-tall giant robot in confusion. An ancient golem? Someone couldn't help but guess, and it quickly resonated. But then, they saw Meow Meow, who had casually thrown the Frost Scepter to the Dream Demon, run towards the ancient golem with a face full of excitement. It wasn't until Meow Meow climbed up and drilled into the giant robot's protective mirror that some people couldn't help but change their expressions. Meow Meow, who had successfully drilled into the Light Messenger's internal cockpit, stepped on a six-pointed star magic circle and felt that its whole body had fused with the Light Messenger. Then, its magic power was quickly drained. Every second, a part of its magic power would be lost. Realizing that it didn't have much time, Meow Meow didn't hesitate to control the Light Messenger to run towards the Frost Emperor. Even though the Light Messenger was big enough, it was still not as big as the Frost Emperor. However, duelists never shoot without aim. Angus Jeffrey felt threatened and immediately shouted, "Frost Emperor, dodge!" "No, Emperor hibernates." Angus Jeffrey released his magic power and remotely controlled the blue magic ball to fly into the Frost Emperor's mouth. When the Frost Scepter was taken away, he decisively gave up on the idea of letting the Frost Emperor end the battle. He chose to retreat and defend. As long as he didn't lose, he would be able to win with a stronger deck. In other words, the strong will always be strong. After the Frost Emperor swallowed the blue magic ball, it didn't hesitate to use its ultimate skill, Emperor Hibernates. It stood on the spot and closed its eyes to sleep. Its magic power, which was less than 2,000 points, jumped to a little over 2,600 points the moment Emperor's hibernation took effect. However, after hibernating, the Frost Emperor became a live target. Angus Jeffrey didn't think that Dake's Dream Demon would be able to make the Frost Emperor lose half of its magic power. As long as it wasn't that strange method, the Frost Emperor wouldn't fall and could easily last 2 rounds. In these 2 rounds, he could accumulate cards and wait for the Frost Emperor to wake up. Then, he could complete the counterattack. However, when the Light Messenger, under Meow Meow's control, quickly approached and pulled out a red great sword from the ground, his confidence was shaken. Dake Dimeng's holy sword was so amazing that he instinctively felt that the sword pulled out by Meow Meow was no small matter. He had to admit that his suspicions were very accurate. "Meow! Come out, wishful godly sword!" The Light Messenger grabbed the wishful godly sword and raised it up high. As Meowma's magic power was quickly drained, the great sword exploded with an intense golden light, turning into a great sword of light. The light messenger's attack power increased from 2500 to 3000 points. A strange flush appeared on Meowma's face, but its magic power that was about to run out reminded it not to enjoy the sword too much. Thus, it controlled the light messenger to raise the wishful godly sword, and slashed down at the Frost Emperor. Meow! Wishful godly sword! The edge of the great sword of light suddenly exploded with magic power like flames. The moment Meow Meow slashed down, it took a step forward, and the wishful godly sword, that was taller than the Frost Emperor's head, slashed down. Boom! The flaming sword didn't feel any resistance at all. It was as if the Emperor Fat of the Frost Emperor had never existed. The Emperor Penguin's gigantic body was easily sliced in half by the sword light that shone like a gear. Angus Jeffrey's eyes suddenly became bloodshot. Impossible! Along with the shouts of being unable to accept reality, there was also a terrifying pain that felt as if one's heart and bones had been gouged out. When the Frost Emperor was sliced in half, the blue magic conducting ball that had been swallowed by the Frost Emperor hit the blade of the Frost Emperor. The shattered life barrier couldn't withstand the power of the wishful godly sword at all. Not only did the life barrier completely shatter, even the tough magic conducting ball was sliced in half. As the Frost Emperor's body fell to the two sides and shattered into countless sparkling magic power, the magic conducting ball that had been sliced in half appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The referee, who was slow to react, had a look of fear on his face. After a while, he hurriedly blew the whistle. The nobles in the circular hallway instantly let out loud cries of surprise. Even the noble madam was drenched in sweat. Cheers and discussions instantly filled the entire center of the hall. Those who cared about Dake smiled knowingly. However, in the dual domain that was surrounded by gray flames, the true danger had only just begun. Dake Dimming didn't let down his guard just because he won this duel. He didn't even put away the magic conducting fairy in the arena. Instead, he stared at Angus Jeffrey, who was on the other side of the arena. Angus Jeffrey had been holding his head and screaming ever since the life barrier of the blue magic conducting ball was shattered. Dake thought that Angus Jeffrey would gradually stop screaming. However, Angus Jeffrey's screams were getting more and more intense, to the point that it made one's hair stand on end. Dark subconsciously furrowed his brows as he recalled the terrified expression of the defeated duelist in the duel with Angus Jeffrey. Could it be that the initiator of the dual domain will suffer even more pain and backlash after losing? He didn't act rashly. Instead, he took out the remaining cards from the slots and placed them all in his hands. It was at this moment that the gray flame on Angus Jeffrey's forehead danced wildly in the wind like a fiery demon. Angus Jeffrey held his head and screamed in pain. The gray flame spread downwards and covered his entire body in an instant. It was burning wildly around his body. The flames around the arena also started dancing wildly as if they were resonating with the flame. An indescribable atmosphere of fanaticism rose in the dual domain. 7. 5 in 115,000 plus. 0136/233, babies. Cast your minimum monthly votes and razor blades. 3. I counted wrong last time. This time, there are less than 100 chapters left. Chapter 519. Looking at the wildly dancing flames, Dake narrowed his eyes and gradually felt a sense of familiarity. It was only when he turned his gaze back to Angus Jeffrey that he suddenly realized how similar the scene in front of him was to the Demon King execution ceremony. Angus Jeffrey, who was surrounded by gray flames, was like a burning Demon King's corpse. The dancing flames around the field were the spectators who were affected by the enchantment. But in the blink of an eye, Dake realized that this was actually a common scene in events such as rituals and speeches. In fact, it was not rare. The only common point that needed to be noted was the word ritual. Whether it was the dark duel in Dake's memory or the dual domain in front of him, in fact, they all had the shadow of a ritual. Now that the ritual had reached its end, the final result was about to be revealed. As the final victor of this duel, He only needed to wait patiently to enjoy the fruits of victory. What he should be worried about was the taste of the fruit. Would it be sour or sweet? Website: https://m Vipkanchu. VIP. He did not have to wait for too long. The wildly burning grey flames around Angus Jeffrey's body swept upwards like a whirlwind, and all of them left his body. Angus Jeffrey's blood-curdling screams abruptly disappeared at this moment. But his whole body seemed to have completely lost all strength and became dispirited. Even his hands that were holding his head fell limply to the ground. The grey flames continued to rise into the sky, as if taking away something that was difficult to see. Only the flame on his forehead was still burning. Did his memory get taken away? Dake frowned as he pondered. He saw the grey flame on Angus Jeffrey's forehead suddenly rise, the originally vigorous flame becoming extremely thin and long. Then, the flame suddenly curled up like a snake, and when it curled up to its limit, it instantly shot out. The flame connected to the tail of Angus Jeffrey's forehead and was completely pulled out. Angus Jeffrey, who was originally dispirited, suddenly let out a scream. His entire body straightened due to this stimulation, and then the twisted expression on his face relaxed without any warning. His half-opened eyes were empty. Only then did the flames in the entire dual domain gather towards the grey flame that had returned to its original state. The grey flame absorbed the flames in a frenzy. In just a few seconds, it had swallowed all the flames. The color of the flame also became more solid. Dake stared at the flame. Suddenly, he felt his magic power pulsate. He subconsciously reached out his hand. The flame suddenly disappeared, and when it condensed again, it was already in his palm. He reflexively wanted to retract his hand, but the flame did not emit any heat. Instead, a trace of coldness was transmitted to his palm, causing him to be shocked. Then, following that slight chill, as if he was absorbing information from a magic card, fragments of information suddenly appeared in his mind. Dake quickly digested the information, and a look of understanding gradually appeared on his face. Afterward, he gathered magic power in his 5 fingers and suddenly clenched his fist, squeezing the grey flame out of shape. However, the flame was not extinguished. Instead, it slipped through the gaps between his fingers and condensed into a new shape. Dake's eyebrows twitched, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He did not know why. The grey flame did not enter Angus Jeffrey's body like it did with Angus Jeffrey. In fact, this did not conform to its nature. Of course, it could also be that it wanted to, but could not. As the grey flame was taken away by Dake, the dual domain that Angus Jeffrey had launched naturally disappeared. The strange atmosphere that filled the arena quickly disappeared without a trace. No one knew that a dark duel had taken place under the watchful eyes of the public, and no one knew what Angus Jeffrey had experienced before and after the duel. Dake raised his head and looked across. Angus Jeffrey's eyelids were twitching, and his empty eyes were being filled by some kind of consciousness. When he suddenly blinked his eyes, it was as if he had received a huge shock, and he suddenly screamed. Then, he pressed down on the card table, cold sweat dripping down. Dake frowned and probed. "Senior Jeffrey?" The friendly greeting that was transmitted through the loudspeaker was received by Angus Jeffrey as usual. He seemed to understand that he was in the middle of a duel. No, after the second duel, he still lost miserably. However, in his memory, there was obviously nothing related to the grey flame. "I lost again?" Angus Jeffrey raised his hand and pressed his forehead. He only felt as if there was a huge hole in his heart, and endless emptiness swept over him. He interpreted it as the disappointment after losing to Dake. He gritted his teeth and replied, "You won this time, but you won't always win." As soon as he finished speaking, he grabbed the magic card and walked towards the stairs with a slight stumble. Looking at his back as he gradually walked down the platform, Dake pursed his lips and recalled his magic elves back into the card. Then, he turned around and walked down the platform. The grey flame floated beside him, following him as he continued to descend. Dake walked to the ground and looked at Olga, who was waiting with a smile. He whispered, "Let's go." Then, without waiting for Jessica to lead the way, the two quickly left the arena. After they walked out of the circular corridor, they came face to face with some familiar-looking nobles. However, Dake didn't have the leisure to pretend to be polite with these nobles who he didn't know when he would cross paths with. He casually said that he was a little tired and pushed away the nobles who were making exaggerated remarks. Then, he quickly found Panduola and Aurora. Phyllis, who was next to them, exclaimed, "Dake, what was that golem you summoned at the end? Angus Fat Penguin couldn't block it at all." "It's a type of armor." Dake smiled. At the mention of armor, Phyllis couldn't help but cover her mouth and say, "It's the Valkyrie. I mean the Duke. Did she teach you?" Dake nodded and said, "Of course." Then, Olga, who was walking behind him, suddenly took a step forward and whispered something in his ear. Dake looked surprised and then said apologetically, "I'm sorry, Phyllis. I might have something to do and have to go back. Tonight's dinner will be on you next time." Phyllis looked at the head maid who had already looked up with interest and said, "No problem. But the next time I invite you, don't refuse." "Of course not." Dake smiled. Then, he took Pandora and Aurora and quickly left the Haunting by Dreams clubhouse. When the four of them got back into the carriage, Panduola asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Dake said, "I suddenly remembered that there's a farewell party for you tonight." "Didn't you say to do it tonight?" Panduola's lips curled up. Dake smiled and said, "I suddenly feel that it's better to do it earlier." Panduola said, "All right then. There's nothing interesting in this hall anyway." The carriage fell into silence. Aurora looked at the two people beside her curiously and didn't say anything. The carriage quickly left the Haunting Hall's garden and went on the road to the Duke's mansion. As the sun set in the west and dusk arrived, the pedestrians on the road became more hurried. When the sky outside the window was completely swallowed by the orange-red sunset, there were fewer and fewer people and carriages on the road. The dragon tamer who was driving the carriage lit up the lights on both sides of the carriage door and slowed down. Only at this moment did Doc extend his hand. His 5 fingers clenched as the grey flame gathered at the center of his palm. Panduola looked at his movements curiously and asked, "In your palm?" "Yes." Dake nodded and said, "A grey flame." Panduola shook his head and said, "I can't see it." Aurora couldn't help but ask, "What can't you see?" Dake took a breath and said, "Let's wait a little longer." Before night fell, the carriage finally arrived at the Duke's mansion. When the dragon-horned horse slowly stopped, the 4 people in the carriage walked out one after another. Dake dismissed the maidservants who came to welcome them and quickly entered the mansion. At this time, the Duke's mansion was still brightly lit. The maidservants of the Ares Palace maidservants were still preparing the dishes for the farewell party. Arvette and the others, who had eaten a little, were drinking tea and chatting in the living room. Dake saw the lights in the room and walked up to the second floor. He pushed open the door and entered. "You're back." Arvette saw a treasure that she hadn't seen during the day and naturally revealed a happy expression. "Did you bring Panduola out to play?" Claire casually teased. Hephaestus sipped her tea and smiled. But that smile quickly disappeared. The 3 of them were very sensitive and noticed that the atmosphere was strange. Dake nodded at them and quickly walked to the center of the living room and sat down in front of the tea table. Panduola walked to Hephaestus and sat down. Aurora sat next to Arvette. "Gotcha." Olga locked the door from the inside and walked over. Dake waited for everyone to gather before grabbing the grey flame in his hand. He slowly opened his palm and said solemnly, "Can you see it?" Among the 3 people present, one was the Valkyrie, who stood at the peak 10 years ago, another was the famous Sage of the Beasts, and the last one was a pure-blooded white dragon with a true dragon's eye. If even they couldn't see this grey flame, it meant that even in the underworld, it was definitely an extraordinary item. However, the worst situation did not occur. Apart from Claire, Arvette and Hephaestus clearly had witnessed expressions on their faces. Thus, Claire complained, "So what did you see?" Arvette's expression relaxed and said, "I couldn't see much. It was just a blurry black shadow." Hephaestus glanced at her and immediately smiled, "Then I can see more. Wait a moment." Evidently, she was very happy that she had surpassed the Valkyrie in a certain ability. Hephaestus looked at the grey flame in Dake's hand again and slowly opened her eyes. As the magic power gathered, white light appeared in her eyes. Her pupils suddenly disappeared, and 2 beams of white light suddenly shot out from her eyes. With a thought, Dake took the initiative to put the flame in front of Hephaestus' gaze. After being shined on by that gaze, the grey flame took on the shape of a black shadow. However, from its outline, it could be seen that it was a flame. Claire asked in surprise, "Where did you get this flame?" Dake slowly explained what had happened today. "Wait, you said that this is the spoils of war from your duel with the Jeffrey family's son?" Claire interrupted him and asked, "Then, where did the Jeffrey family's son obtain this flame?" Dake took a deep breath and said, "The information I obtained was very limited, but if I'm not wrong, it should have been leaked from the underworld." "From the underworld?" Claire asked curiously, "Could it be the underworld fire?" Dake said, "Before we truly understand its origin, we can temporarily call it the underworld fire." "Wait a moment." Arvet interrupted the conversation again and said solemnly, "Did Angus Jeffrey take the initiative to challenge you to a duel?" "Yes." Dake nodded. "This is the second time." Arvet frowned and said, "Did he target you in the academy?" Dake smiled slightly. "It seems so, but I don't have any impression of it." "Is that so?" Arvet said, "According to what you said, although Angus Jeffrey was possessed by the underworld fire, he didn't lose his consciousness. It was just that his personality became more extreme, and he was filled with an inexplicable obsession with duels?" Dark looked at the grey flame and placed it on the tip of his finger. He shook it slightly and said slowly, "In fact, I obtained some fragmented memories from this underworld fire. This underworld fire is very likely the manifestation of some individual consciousness fragment, and it's only a small part of it. Because that individual consciousness has a strong obsession with duels, it was able to create a dual ritual ability after possessing Jeffrey's body. And its duel shouldn't be referring to a magician's duel. Its original consciousness was likely pointing to a duel between gladiators or a duel between knights. It's just that in this era, magician's duel has almost monopolized the definition of duel. So, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, actually, I'm just guessing. It's also possible that the duel in Jeffrey's mind was a magician's duel." Dake's eyes reflected the flames as he continued, "Jeffrey was possessed by the underworld fire when he was watching the Demon King's execution ceremony. It's very likely that there are many people like him who have been possessed. If the possessed person is a warrior, the so-called duel might be a real battle of swords and spears. At present, it seems that the person possessed by the underworld fire is extremely aggressive, causing the possessed person to have the desire to duel with others. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that there are people with strong willpower who can restrain this impulse. And if you can win in a duel, not only can you extract the memories related to the underworld fire from the loser's mind, but you can also take away a portion of the abilities related to the type of duel. When used in a magician's duel, what is taken away is a portion of magic power and a portion of knowledge. Angus Jeffrey took away a lot of magic power and knowledge from the duelists over the past few days of duels. If you give him enough time to accumulate and digest it, he might become more difficult to deal with. In short, I call this kind of duel a dark duel." With Dake's tireless explanation, the other three finally realized the danger hidden under the magician's duel. Olga couldn't help but clench her fists. She was clearly only one platform away from the young master, but she didn't notice the dual domain at all. If the young master wasn't outstanding enough, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Panduola and Aurora's eyebrows twitched as they listened. After some slight regret, Panduola couldn't help but look into Hephaestus' eyes. She originally didn't care about the true dragon's eye, but now she had a desire. Perhaps we should seriously explore the mysteries contained within the dragon blood? While Panduola was frowning in thought, Aurora was also worried about her own lack of ability. She originally had a certain degree of confidence in her own abilities, but after coming to the Duke's mansion, that confidence had dwindled. She clenched her teeth and set a goal for herself. A dark duel? After careful consideration, Arvet said worriedly. If it's really like what you said, things will become very troublesome. At that time, the crowd gathered around St. Louis Square came from all over the world. Not only were there a large number of subhumans, but there were also remnants of the demon race and people from the evil church. If they obtain the ability to start a dark duel, it's not that pessimistic. Claire shook her head. The Holy Church held a holy inquisition for this, and they might even use this to start a new holy war. Arvet couldn't help but roll her eyes. That's even more troublesome. After saying that, she unexpectedly calmly turned to Dake and asked, "So, after you won the dark duel, you also obtained part of Jeffrey's magic and knowledge?" However, Dake shook his head and said, "No. I only got a few fragmented memories. Apart from Angus Jeffrey's experience, there was only a special spell. After Jeffrey used the magic language to compile it, he combined it with the power of the Underworld Flame to create 2 magic cards called the Underworld Monument. Of course, those 2 magic cards are now useless." "Why is that?" Claire asked. Dake also rolled his eyes at her and said, "Of course it's because I didn't accept the possession of the Underworld Flame." Claire laughed. "Of course I know, I just want to hear it from you." Dake sighed and said, "Actually, I'm more worried about what the Underworld Flame can obtain from the Dark Duel itself. I keep feeling that it's bigger than when Jeffrey first obtained it." Claire said, "According to what you said, it could be magic, or it could be something else." Dake said, "Besides, have you ever thought that if 2 people who are also possessed by the Underworld Flame were to duel," Claire said decisively, "no matter who wins or loses, the Underworld Flame of one person will be absorbed by the other person's Underworld Flame. It will continue to grow, and eventually," Dake said worriedly, "in the end, it's likely to awaken its own consciousness. Moreover, as the Underworld Flame grows bigger, it's very likely that the possessed person will obtain more special abilities from it. In this way, they will take the initiative to find other possessed people. It's like raising poisonous insects, and the final winner will be the king of poisonous insects." Claire shrugged. "That sounds very threatening. But don't you have an Underworld Flame in your hands?" "Who knows? Maybe you'll be the king of poisonous insects in the end." Dake said helplessly, "I'll repeat myself, I didn't accept the possession of the Underworld Flame." Claire laughed. "Then have you ever thought about why you can see it, but we can't?" Dake's tone suddenly became sluggish, and he said hesitantly, "Maybe it's because I won the duel. According to the rules of the duel, I obtained the ownership of this Underworld Flame." He used his index finger to draw a circle, and the Underworld Flame followed his finger in a circle, looking like an obedient puppy. Arvet frowned. "No matter what, you have to be careful. If the Underworld Flame acts strangely, immediately tell Mother. If you're in the academy, go find Headmaster Aerti. Right now, we don't know anything about the Underworld Flame, so we have to be careful." Dake nodded and said, "In fact, the most troublesome thing about the Underworld Flame is that we don't know anything about it. Apart from the 2 of you, no one else can sense it." "Indeed," Arvet said. "Otherwise, we could have searched out all the possessed people and conducted a planned experiment on the fusion of the Underworld's fire. However, from what we've seen so far, this is basically impossible. But you don't have to worry too much. Even if the sky falls, Mother will hold it up." Dake couldn't help but reply, "Okay." The invisibility of the Underworld Flame made it very difficult to find the possessed people, and the nature of this raising poisonous insects made it unsuitable for it to be made public. Otherwise, it would only speed up the process of raising poisonous insects. After Arvet and Claire gained a clear understanding of some of the characteristics of the Underworld's flames through Dark's hands, they temporarily put this matter aside. They didn't forget that there was a farewell party for Hephaestus and Panduola tonight. Hephaestus and Panduola didn't change their minds about leaving because of this sudden incident. At 8 o'clock sharp, the banquet hall was filled with all kinds of delicacies. Then, Dake and the others entered the hall with the magic elves. Tonight's banquet wasn't as formal as Dake's birthday party, and only their own people attended. The magic elves ran around the hall cheerfully, adding a lively atmosphere to the farewell party. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, everyone got on the stage and started dancing. Halfway through the dance, Panduola quietly pulled Dake out of the dance floor. The young boy and girl went to the balcony. The warm summer night breeze caressed their cheeks, and the bright moon hung in the night sky, their faces red. Tonight's moonlight is so beautiful. 3 in 16000 plus 0137/233. From today until the 3rd of July, you can't edit any text, so you can't insert any pictures. /hot suit /. Chapter 520. At dawn the next day, Panduola and Hephaestus left the capital in a carriage. They planned to take the magic car to the town outside the Shang-Malian Academy before deciding on their next itinerary. From the news leaked by the Duke's mansion, the two had already guessed that the Holy Church was about to make a big move. If they didn't leave the capital, it might cause unnecessary trouble for the Duke's mansion. "Don't look, they've already left." Claire poked Dake's face and reminded him. Dake took a breath of the freshest air of the day and said, "Then, let's begin our experiment." After a night of thinking, Dake had more guesses about the origin of the underworld fire. According to the common understanding of the underworld, after a person died and entered the underworld, the consciousness in the soul would be gradually erased after a long period of wandering. But matter and energy were conserved. Nothing would disappear into thin air. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. 6. The so-called erasure of consciousness was very likely to be stripped and transformed into something else. For example, the underworld fire. Dake believed that the complete underworld fire should be a collection of consciousness. Perhaps they would be divided into different categories due to their different tendencies and fuse into a huge body of consciousness that was not called underworld fire. But the possibility of such a huge body of consciousness was very high. And the gray flame in Dake's hand was a small part of it. Regardless of whether it was true or not, he needed to confirm the basic nature of the underworld fire through experiments. Only by understanding it could he restrain it. And now, there was a ready-made method to understand it. At the same time, he could also see how much control he had over the underworld fire. Not long after, Dake was ready in the laboratory. Experiment staff, Dake Diming Experiment Assistant, Claire Kate Experiment Logistics, Ollie Diming Experiment Audience, Yalvet Saint Diming Experiment Audience, Aurora Monty Irvery Experiment Material. Underworld Fire. Angus Jeffrey had once used a spell he obtained from the Underworld Fire to create 2 Underworld Steels. Now that Dake had obtained the rights to the Underworld Flame, he naturally obtained the curse as well. From Angus Jeffrey's memories, he even obtained the method to compile the spell. Otherwise, with Dake's current mastery of the arcane language, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to compile the spell in real time. Sometimes, the same incantation can result in completely different results when compiled by different people using different magical languages. Claire carefully checked the coding method that Dake had copied down and said, "There's no problem with this coding method. Just follow it." Dake nodded and immediately began to compile the spell. As for Yvette and Aurora, they sat by the side drinking tea. Half an hour later, Dake completed the preliminary compilation of the spell. He then continued to test and debug the compiled spell according to Angus Jeffrey's method. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he finally finished all the debugging. "Next, I'll use this spell as the foundation to create a spell card." From the compilation of the spell to using the underworld fire as the core material to create the spell card, it was a process of fully understanding the spell. Dake took out a pipette and tried to extract a tube of flame from the underworld fire. The underworld fire had a very strange nature. Not only did it not release heat, but it also did not consume fuel. It gave people the feeling that it was not a flame, but a soul-like substance in the shape of a flame. Therefore, although it looked like it was burning, it was actually shaking. On the whole, it was divided into 2 parts. One part was the core like a small flame, and the other part was the flame outside the core. The core was difficult to extract and stored memories, magic, and other substances. The flame outside the core was like skin and hair. After being extracted, it could be regenerated. Angus Jeffrey's Underworld Monument was created by using the flame outside the core as the material. Therefore, Dake also extracted a tube of flame and used it as the ink to write the spell. He began to create the spell card. In fact, it was not difficult to create the spell card this time. Whether it was the compilation of the spell or the collection of other materials, they were all in the category of relatively simple. The overall difficulty was probably lower than the flicker spell. He was able to create a spell card like the Underworld Monument because of the uniqueness of the Underworld Fire. In order to observe and test the Underworld Fire in detail during the process of creating the card, Dake deliberately slowed down the speed of the process. However, when it was about 10:30 a.m., he still managed to complete the refinement. This was the first time he used the Underworld Fire, and the process was very smooth. It was just like the situation when Angus Jeffrey was creating the card in the memory fragment. According to Angus Jeffrey's memory, the success rate would be very low from the second time onwards. He used almost a whole week to create the second Underworld Monument. After that, he realized that he could not succeed anymore. The Underworld Fire was almost bald because of him. He had to rely on continuous duels to replenish the nutrients for it to grow again. Dake had no mercy for the Underworld Fire. So, he was prepared to make it bald too. Is the creation a success just like that? Aurora asked curiously as she carefully observed the magic card lying quietly on the table. Yes, the basic magic card creation is actually not complicated. You will come into contact with it more frequently when you go to school. Dake used a pair of tweezers to pick up the magic card and rinsed it in the sink before putting it back on the table. Everyone's gazes gathered. The edges of this magic card were suffused with a faint light, like a gray flame, while the base color of the card was pitch black. If one stared at the pitch black, they would have the illusion that they would be sucked in. On top of the pitch black background, a rusty gray collar lay quietly. The surface of the collar was engraved with vague flame-like patterns. A silver-gray iron chain that was thicker and longer than the collar stretched out from the buckle. At the end of the iron chain was a handshake ring. Isn't this the Underworld Monument? Dake frowned slightly and was a little disappointed. Angus Jeffrey's Underworld Monument was very useful. The Underworld Shackle, that could bind the Moon Goddess, was a very powerful combo skill. But the magic card creation was like that. The characteristics of the Magus would always have different degrees of influence on the creation of the card. The final result of the creation would also be different. Claire poked his face and reminded him, "Don't just stand there. What magic card is this?" Dark answered. He then picked up the magic card and injected a trace of magic power into it. The collar on the card glowed, and some information was transmitted to Dake's mind through the magic power. He thought for a moment and said, "Underworld Soul Ring, a magic card that can summon a soul collar. It seems that the effect of the spell is very likely to be binding." A binding spell? Claire rested her chin on her hand and thought, "Then what's the use of your Underworld Soul Ring?" "Let me see." Dake continued to inject magic power and analyzed the magic card in his hand. After a moment, a smile appeared on his face. Not bad. Underworld Soul Ring. A necklace that summons souls. Bind the opponent's soul and drag it to the abyss of the underworld as a sacrifice to the god of the underworld. A magic card that can bind the opponent's magic fairy and turn it into a sacrifice. It has a wide range of applications. But for now, there might be a limit to the strength of the binding. It's most likely that it can only turn a first-tier magic fairy into a sacrifice. If it's a second-tier fairy, it will only have a certain degree of binding effect. Dake continued to inject magic power and then used a normal summoning spell. Soon, the Underworld Soul Ring was summoned. Tools like this that relied on magic spell cards to summon were actually the manifestation of magic power. They were a form of magic manifestation, and not a real tool. Angus Jeffrey's Underworld Steel was the same. However, when the Archmage categorized this type of magic card, they would sometimes categorize it as an item card. Just like the Holy Sword Curse, it was both a magic card and an item card. After summoning the Underworld Soul Ring, Dake subconsciously looked for the little devil. After a short pause, he remembered that the little devil was still studying hard. Claire carefully observed the collar in Dake's hand and said, "It's similar to my beast trapping hoop. However, although my beast trapping hoop is stronger, it can only catch birds and beasts." Then she thought for a while and said, "Jeffrey can increase his strength by refining 2 underworld steels. Maybe you can do the same?" Dake looked at the flames on the underworld fire that were still quite full and thought, "I can give it a try." After having an idea, Dake immediately began the second round of refining. But until 9 o'clock in the evening, when all the flames outside the core of the underworld fire were stripped bare, he still couldn't refine the second magic card. As for Claire and Yalvet, they had already left during the day. Although it wasn't convenient for them to reveal the details of the underworld fire, they could still increase their vigilance and strictly investigate crimes to reduce the danger. Thus, only Aurora Montefiore was left by Dake's side. But to Aurora, the whole process was equivalent to the feeling of a primary school student watching a university student do an experiment. Dong dong dong. Gotcha. Olga walked in with pastries and tea. After putting the tray on the table, she asked, "How is it? Is there a result?" Dake smiled helplessly. "No result, but it's over." With that said, he put down all the things in his hands and asked Aurora to clean up the remnants of the experiment. The simplest way to replenish the external flames of the underworld fire was to duel with someone. But dueling with someone was bound to take risks. Even if he won, it would bring pain to his opponent. This was completely contrary to the vision of using duels to bring smiles to others. And Dake wasn't sure if he could start a dark duel. After all, he wasn't possessed by the underworld fire. If that's the case, then I can only wait for the underworld fire to grow on its own. Every time it grows, I'll cut it. Every time it grows, I'll cut it. Dake poked the underworld fire, that was only the size of a walnut, with his fingertips. Suddenly, he had an idea. He reached out and grabbed it into his palm. Then, he infused his palm with magic power and closed his fingers. He actually pressed the underworld fire under the skin of his palm. When he stopped, the underworld fire was already completely hidden in his palm. The next day, on Monday, it started to drizzle in the royal capital in the wee hours of the morning. Alvet and Claire left the Duke's mansion early in the morning. After Dake finished his morning exercise, he didn't put too much effort into the underworld fire. Instead, he began to study the transformation spell and fill in the teaching materials for mathematics too. Not long after, Anna returned with Camilla and rejoined the army of learning. But because the armed combat lesson wasn't reopened, she spent most of her time self-studying and doing summer homework. However, the growth of an archmage was extremely dependent on self-study. Relying on one's own efforts to understand and grasp more knowledge was much better than being forced to learn. In the process of self-study, an archmage could train their ability to explore and research to the greatest extent. This was very important for an archmage. At the same time, Aurora also borrowed the first-year textbook from Dake and joined the army of self-study. The learning atmosphere in the Duke's mansion became even more intense. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed. Dake finally finished writing and adjusting the transformation spell on Sunday night. He knocked on Claire's door with uncontrollable excitement. This week, Claire had been busy preparing for the establishment of the Archmage Society. She didn't know much about this area, so she needed to cram in. But when Dake occasionally paid attention, he would see a satisfied smile on her face. Maybe this is the feeling of finding a goal, Dake thought as he slightly increased the strength of his knocking. "Gotcha." The door suddenly opened, and a lion's round face appeared. Dake walked into the room as if he was used to it. He smiled and said, "Good evening, Aunt Claire." "Good evening, Dake." Claire replied casually, but her tone was obviously annoyed. Dake asked curiously, "Aunt Claire, what's bothering you?" Claire frowned and said, "I'm thinking, what should I name the society?" "So you're thinking of a name?" Dake could not help but show an empathetic expression. "I'm also very bad at naming. Until now, I haven't decided on the names of the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter." Claire said casually, "One will be called Olivia, and the other will be called Phoenix." "Oh, ah." Dake could not help but pause, and then he really began to think about it. Olivia was the alias of the Blood Princess, Ophelia Bullard. Although the vampire's daughter was no longer related to her, she was still a magical fairy that had been refined to save her. Therefore, the relationship between them could not be severed. Olivia was indeed a very nice name. As for Phoenix, it also meant Phoenix in this world. Naturally, it was the most suitable name. In the end, he only needed to give them the surname of Dimming. Claire turned to look at him and said lazily, "The entrance exam is on August 15th. We need to leave 2 days in advance. Their IDs also need to be registered in advance. You'd better decide quickly." "Okay." Dake took a deep breath. "Then I'll ask for their opinions tomorrow. But the blood bag of the vampire's daughter. I already have a plan for that." Claire smiled. "On the eve of the Demon King's execution ceremony, we destroyed an evil cult's lair and seized something interesting. I'll give it to you after their trial is over." "That's good." The heavy burden that had been weighing on Doc's heart was finally lifted. Claire turned her eyes and said, "So, can you help me think of a name for our club?" Dake walked to Claire's side, thanked Monkey who had brought the table, and sat down. Then he said, "Since the main body of the society is the Magister, why don't we call it the Dake Magister Society?" Claire rolled her eyes and said, "Then we might as well call it the Claire Magister Society. Anyway, although I've decided to only recruit Magisters as core members, it's best not to be so obvious in the name. After all, most ordinary people have the same impression of Magisters and sorcerers. They feel mysterious and reverent at the same time. It's not good for the society's promotion among the ordinary people." "I'm just kidding." Dake thought for a moment and said, "Then, how about the International Projection Society? Since our main goal is to make profits and development, it's not a bad choice to directly highlight projection." "International," Claire said. "Are you planning to expand your business into the market of other races?" Dake said seriously, "Of course. Since we're going to build it, naturally, we have to build a world-class society. At least, that's the goal." Claire couldn't help but stroke her hair and said, "You're thinking even further than I am." "But we're only a 2-member society now." Dake couldn't help but laugh. "How can there be only 2 members? What do you think of Eve and Erin?" Claire frowned slightly and said, "Eve and Erin, are they the twin sisters under Chris?" Dake nodded. "That's right, it's them. If a company wants to expand, it's necessary to gather intelligence. We can't always rely on the intelligence from the Duke's residence. It's always right to reserve an intelligence department in advance. Besides, the magic they have is very useful. If we really want to do the business of dual plates and cards, we have to keep in touch with the Academy at all times." "Claire, you mean," Dake curled the corner of his mouth and said, "Eve and Erin can leave one person behind in Traveler's Street." In this case, it would be very convenient for him. After Claire realized the key point, she looked at him meaningfully and said, "On the 15th, I'll go to the Academy with you. We'll discuss it in detail with Professor Shi Erfu. Although the Academy definitely won't reject this kind of suggestion, they won't necessarily give in." Dake blinked and said, "Then, why don't we pull Janice into our society too? A good public relations department is also important for a large society. Anyway, Janice has nothing to do in the residence." Claire shook her head with a smile. "My original intention of founding the society is to help our vet better. Besides, how can you steal your mother's men like that?" Dake let out a hollow laugh. "What about Teacher Cyrus?" Claire shook her head again. "He's old." Dake. "That's true." Claire took a deep breath and said, "Let's leave it at that. Eve and Eve together can barely be considered a magister. That makes 4 of us. As for the name of the society, I'll think about it. Have you finished debugging the transformation spell?" Only then did Doc remember his purpose for coming here. He took out the half-finished transfiguration spell and said, "Yes, I think I can try to inscribe the spell into this magic card." Claire nodded. Then let's begin. To be honest, I've been curious about what kind of animal you'll become for a long time. Dake shrugged and said, "What else can I become? In short, I'll be an animal like a cat or a dog. Actually, I'm more interested in becoming a fish or a bird. One can go into the water, and the other can fly. But considering that fish can't move on the ground, birds are better. Maybe an amphibious one would work too." As Dake spoke, he suddenly realized that Claire's gaze was a little strange. It was as if she was looking at Doryman. He shuddered subconsciously and quickly refocused his attention on the magic card in his hand. This half-finished transfiguration spell only needed to be written with a specific ink to complete the spell before it could be completed. Dark had already adjusted the magic potion that acted as the ink. He injected it into the axis of the magic pen and then wrote a magic spell on the paper as practice. Then, he activated the magic card with his magic and began to write the magic spell in the square box that appeared. In just 3 minutes, he had finished writing the curse. Nearly 2 weeks of hard work was all focused on these 3 minutes. Fortunately, there were no mistakes in the end. Dake checked it carefully and smiled with anticipation. Then, he waited for the spell to gradually integrate into the magic card and stimulate the internal circuit to operate. After waiting patiently for about 5 minutes, the internal reaction of the transformation spell finally stopped. It should be a success. Before he picked it up to check, Claire said directly. Dake sighed in relief and asked, "If I use the transformation spell, will it transform my clothes as well?" Claire nodded. "This one of yours should be. But the range is still limited. You can't wear clothes that are too thick." "Then there's no problem." Dake couldn't help but smile. Then, he picked up the transformation spell and couldn't wait to cast the usual summoning spell. 3 in 16/100 plus 0138/233 babies. It's the end of the month. Cast your minimum monthly votes and blades. 3. Also, from today until July 3rd, every chapter has to be manually reviewed before it can be displayed. So, there will be a delay of a few hours. As for the lack of time, asterisk. Sieve, greater than sign. Chapter 521. Before the transformation spell obtained the transformation data, there was only a cloud of mist on the card surface. Dake held the transformation spell in his hand, and his lips moved quickly. With the successful casting of the usual summoning spell, the cloud of mist drilled out of the card surface and wrapped him up in the blink of an eye. As for his body, it was within this cloud of mist that he underwent a drastic change. The overall feeling was somewhat similar to the transformation during the armed evolution, but it was also different. Dake's mind moved, and he closed his eyes, carefully sensing the changes in his body. He could feel that his body was becoming smaller, which was not surprising. Most of the transformation spells could not break through the body size and weight of an individual. Generally, they would only become smaller and lighter, but not bigger and heavier. As his body rapidly became smaller, more and more subtle sounds suddenly drilled into his ears, and some unidentifiable smells became clearer. He gradually opened his eyes, and his gaze passed through the thinning smoke. He saw more things that he could not normally see, and even the dark corners suddenly became clear. Hearing, smell, and vision have all been strengthened. The convenience of the transformation spell was here. 1 second to remember. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. Most animals, in terms of hearing, smell, and vision, were more sensitive than humans. And after putting on the harmless skin, they could obtain many conveniences that humans could not obtain. When the smoke completely disappeared, the final transformation was completed. Dake raised his head slightly and saw Claire, who had become huge. He thought about what he had become and was about to ask, "Meow." But as soon as he opened his mouth, he realized that there was no need to ask anymore. "Did I become a cat?" Dake suddenly frowned, and an extremely bad feeling arose in his heart. Then, he abruptly took a step back. Even though it was his first time walking on all fours, his consciousness seemed to have been engraved in the genes of his body, allowing him to complete a perfect backward jump smoothly. Then, Claire grabbed the back of his neck. Meow! Dake suddenly let out a scream, and the shadow of his childhood suddenly appeared. Of all things to become, he actually became a cat. He suddenly raised his head, and indeed, in Claire's eyes, he saw a ferocious gaze as if looking at prey. At the age of 6, because he tore Claire's book, he was turned into a cat by the angry Claire on the spot. From that moment on, a forbidden window opened in Claire Kate's world. The poor little Dake had become a punching bag for the sage of the beasts to vent its stress for a long time. Every time Claire was in a bad mood, she would cast a transformation spell on him. What was even more frightening was that Yvette, who usually listened to everything he said, had actually formed an alliance with Claire in this regard. She ignored his protests and often held cat-stroking tea parties with Claire. Now that the past had become the wind, the memories of his childhood should have been scattered with the wind. But why did this damn transformation spell turn into a cat of all things? Dake instantly lost his desire to investigate further. He swore in his heart that he would seal this transformation spell under the dust. At least in front of Claire, he absolutely couldn't use it a second time. After that, he immediately tried to remove the transformation spell. However, he failed. I forgot to tell you that this transformation spell is the most basic type and there's no option to remove it. Every time you transform, you can only wait until the effect of the spell disappears, Claire said casually. Meow. Dake braced himself and asked. Claire lifted him onto her knees and pinched his paws. 30 minutes. It can only last for 30 minutes at most. The exact duration depends on the magical power you inject during the summoning. In other words, it was controllable to a certain extent. Dake understood instantly. Then, he spread his limbs and gave up resisting completely. 30 minutes later, Claire washed up and went to bed with a satisfied expression. On the other hand, Dake left her room in exhaustion. After returning to his room, he informed Olga, who was still guarding the door, about bringing Eve and Aaron here. Then, he entered the bathtub and soaked himself completely in the hot water. This week of high-intensity homework had made him very tired. Now that he had finally achieved a small goal, he needed to relax. After he finished his bath and prepared for bed, the transformation spell's cooldown was finally over. As expected, the cooldown for this transformation spell was an entire hour after the summoning. Dake came before the full-length mirror and used the transformation spell again to turn himself into a cat. Although he didn't intend to do too much research, he still wanted to know what kind of cat he was and what he looked like. When he was in Claire's room, he didn't have the time to check at all, so he could only return to his room and do it himself. Meow. But just as he transformed and turned his vision to the full-length mirror, an excited cry came from behind him. Then, Fairy Evie flew down from her little bed as if she had grown wings. Dake's face darkened. He immediately raised his paws and sternly refused her approach. Meow, meow, meow. Fairy Evie. Meow, meow, meow. Dake. Meow, meow, meow. Fairy Evie. Meow, meow, meow. Dake. Meow. Woo. Although Fairy Evie looked like a cat, it wasn't a cat. And Dake found that he didn't understand cat language at all. Even if he turned into a cat, he was still a human. Therefore, the two sides couldn't communicate at all. But fortunately, he never hid his research from the magic guide elves, so all the magic guide elves knew that he was researching the transformation spell, and didn't cause confusion because he suddenly turned into a cat. He looked at himself in the mirror and sighed. How can I be a ragdoll? Even if I turned into a cat, it should be a noble Persian cat or a strong Maine cat. Even a random dragon would be good. Forget it, it's good enough that I'm not a Scottish fold. The cat in the mirror had long white fur, sky-blue eyes like clear lake water, and a V-shaped face like a beauty. Because they were so beautiful, ragdolls were often called fairy cats. The larger ragdolls had long and beautiful fur, and their bodies were especially loose and soft, like soft ragdolls. Most ragdolls were more lazy, peaceful, and friendly. They could also be said to be gentle and quiet. Their meows were very sweet, and people couldn't help but want to hug them. Dake transformed into a ragdoll, and his ears were black, which made him look even more luxurious. He endured Fairy Evie's enthusiasm for a few minutes, and then he found that the cat plants were also attracted. He couldn't help but take a deep breath, and hurriedly ran into the study. Although the study couldn't stop Fairy Evie, it could at least separate the cat plants. After waiting for half an hour, Dake returned to his human form, and he grabbed Fairy Evie and violently stroked him, trying to take revenge. But his revenge was clearly not painful. Fairy Evie meowed rather comfortably. So much so that the Delu beast and the other magic guide elves looked at him differently. Fairy Evie, great victory. After the research on the transformation spell was finished, Dake temporarily focused all his attention on the compilation of Mathematics 2. He gradually entered the zone, and the progress of the compilation became faster and faster. If nothing unexpected happens, I should be able to smoothly finish it before August 10th. On the night of July 31st, Dake put down his pen and revealed a smile. Regarding the compilation of the mathematics textbook from the very beginning, he wrote it for credits, but now he developed a faint sense of responsibility. It was as if he was leading the generation, and he didn't feel tired while compiling. But tonight, he needed some time to do the end-of-the-month summary. Because he had obtained too much pride this month, even if he drew a large amount of pride, the index of pride was still high. In addition, his addiction to milk tea and frequent big meals also increased his gluttony. Other than that, he needed to pay special attention to fury. After being affected by the god's fury during the Demon King execution ceremony, fury was increasing, but it was also gradually becoming harder to control. So much so that when he was in the second duel with Angus Jeffrey, it also triggered the growth of fury. Now, the 7 indexes were as follows: pride, 94, envy, 44, fury, 86, sloth, 66, greed, 93, gluttony, 80, bliss, 93. The data in front of him had even exceeded the initial value. Dake carefully looked at the indicators displayed by the system, and his eyebrows gradually deepened. Then he took out his notebook and looked at the initial value of the demon god system. Pride, 92, envy, 39, fury, 93, sloth, 71, greed, 72, gluttony, 52, bliss, 72. Why do I feel like an entire year's worth of hard work has been wasted? After comparing the two lists, Dake couldn't help but touch his forehead. Compared to the initial value at the beginning of September last year, the 7 indexes had all increased. If this happened back then, he would have been scared out of his wits. But now, he could calmly look at it. Now that I compare, I know that only fury and sloth are still dropping. Did I slack off too much? Dake couldn't help but ask himself. Just as he was worried at the beginning, the comfortable life after returning home made him gradually lose his sense of urgency. Every month, he could reduce great sins by 15 points, and it also made him gradually forget about the consequences of not having self-control. But in reality, he was still dancing on the edge of danger. I need to reorganize my thoughts. Dake picked up his pen. As of now, pride has accumulated 26 points, bliss has 5 points, and greed is left with 4 points. Out of these 3, only greed is the easiest to control. If you want to study the other great sins, maybe you should lower greed first. Having 3 sins over 90 points is already very dangerous, so it's best to keep it within 3 points. Now that I've almost finished researching greed, I have 93 points of greed, and I can draw it twice. Combined with the remaining 4 points, I have 7 points. After using these 7 points to cultivate the fruit of greed, I can use them to refine the fruit-gnawing bug. After that, I need to control greed. The next new research target will be either rage or gluttony, Kieran said. In short, I need to draw at least 3 points of greed and 4 points of pride in August. 1 fruit-gnawing bug is enough. If I successfully refine it, I might need to use the fruit of bliss for the next one. I can't waste it. Also, refining a few more bliss magic elves will be good for the moon god armament. If that's the case, I'll draw greed twice, pride thrice, and bliss thrice. A total of 7 draws, and there are 3 extra draws. In short, I'll start with greed. Dake wrote down the August plan in his notebook, put down his pen temporarily, and thought carefully. There were still many things he needed to do in August. First, he had to compile all of Mathematics 2. Then, he had to refine 2 magic elves. Then, he had to experiment with pride. Even if he knew that he would fail, he had to try. If he didn't try, he might never be able to cross this hurdle. Other than that, Yvette had once said that she would bring him to the Tower of Ares in early August. The Tower of Ares, also known as the God of War Pagoda, was a sacred place for armed duels. However, it seemed that Yvette couldn't find the time. Dake wasn't very interested in the Tower of Ares either. Compared to summoning fists to attack, he was more inclined towards magic duels. Moreover, his chakras had stopped progressing after opening 3. Even if he practiced diligently every day, he didn't know when he would be able to open the 4th chakra. With just 3 meridians, even if he had the best armed card, it would be difficult for him to gain a foothold in the Tower of Ares. Moreover, among the armed card in his hands, only the moon god armament could be used, and it only lasted for 15 minutes. Therefore, after careful consideration, he was prepared to postpone the trip to the God of War Pagoda indefinitely. As for Yvette's opinion, Dake was very clear about Yvette's motive. She was afraid that he would become a brave warrior, and bear the brave warrior's destiny, so she wanted to train him. However, only he knew very well that anyone could become a brave warrior, except him. Therefore, Yvette's worries were unnecessary from the start. It was just that, from his standpoint, it was difficult to explain this matter clearly. Moreover, he was still interested in physical training and armed combat training, so he cooperated with Yvette's plan. However, after cooperating for so long, it was time to stop. Dake grabbed the pen and spun it. If he didn't waste time on the Tower of Ares, he could better allocate the remaining time. Yes, apart from the above matters, there were still many things that he needed to do. After August 10th, it would be the real start of his busy schedule. In the blink of an eye, it was August. The weather in the royal capital was still hot, and there were no signs of autumn. Dake found time to look for Yvette and used the reason that he needed time to write Mathematics 2 to postpone the trip to the God of War Pagoda. Then, after 2 nights of absorbing, he finally gathered 7 points of greed again. However, this time, he was very calm. Therefore, he didn't start refining the magic guide sprite that night. Instead, he cultivated the flower of greed first and waited until the next morning to cultivate the fruit of greed. After that, he plucked the fruit of greed from the top of the dragon grass and cut off the remaining stem of greed. Then, he summoned Kettle during class and squeezed the fruit of greed, dragon, into juice. After everything was ready, Dark started to refine the fruit gnawing bug again. First, he killed the dragon worm fruit. Then, he used a special method to activate the magic inside the dragon worm fruit. This time, Dake summed up the experience of failure and prepared to use the remaining green dragon worm fruit and red dragon worm fruit. The fruit-eating bug was a special Pokemon that could evolve into Apple Wrapping Dragon by using Sour Apple, and Sweet Apple could evolve into Honey Dragon. When Dake was thinking about refining it, he divided the 2 types of evolution. He thought that using the green dragon worm fruit as the core would allow him to refine a fruit-eating bug that could evolve into Apple Wrapping Dragon, while using the red dragon worm fruit as the core would allow him to refine a fruit-eating bug that could evolve into Honey Dragon. However, he ended up refining Little Snorlax. Although this was due to the randomness of the basic refining method. However, when it came to probabilities, in the absence of sufficient data as a sample, it was just a matter of speculation. The real reason for the deviation in the refining process was very likely to be because of the core material. The fruit-eating bug was actually a type of Pokemon that was similar to Ivan, in that it had two types of evolution potential. If it was divided from the beginning, it would be equivalent to stripping away another type of potential. The fruit-eating bug, refined that way, would definitely be incomplete. In other words, Dake's train of thought was wrong. For the second refinement, he reorganized his train of thought and decided to use 2 dragon worm fruits to refine it together. With sufficient preparation, Dake quickly began the official refining experiment. He did not do anything unnecessary. Other than using an extra dragon worm fruit, the entire refining process was exactly the same as the last time. After only half an hour, he had completed all the refining steps. As the last bit of material was put in, the light emitted from the number 1 refining formation went from the limit to the limit and calmed down in a breath's time. When the magic card was wrapped in the light cocoon, Dake patiently waited for 5 minutes until the light cocoon's internal reaction completely stopped. Only then did he pick up the mercury knife and cut the light cocoon along the center line. The magic light that shot out from the cut made him squint his eyes. Like most magic refinements, the impurities that were not absorbed by the magic card turned into a black liquid and were expelled from the body. Dake had already prepared a towel and quickly wiped the viscous liquid that flowed out. Then, he covered his right hand with the towel, picked up the magic card and rinsed it in the sink. As the black substance stuck on the magic card was washed off, a faint orange halo emerged from the inside. This meant that the magic card was not a gold card, but an orange card. Dake was not disappointed. A gold card usually meant that there must be a supermodel's ultimate skill among the 4 ultimate skills. However, this did not mean that there could not be similar ultimate skills among the orange cards. Moreover, the fruit-eater bug was just a useless big apple before it evolved, if the refining was successful. Therefore, under normal circumstances, he should leave the expectation for its evolved form. At least for now, using Greed 3 would definitely make it evolve. He just did not know what form it would evolve into. Dake was thinking while he did the final rinsing of the magic card. When the impurities on the card were washed off, the array of the magic card was finally revealed. This time, there was no accident. He had indeed refined a fruit-eater bug. There was a hint of excitement in Dake's eyes, but he quickly controlled his emotions. He first wiped the water stains on the magic card, then sat down and looked at it slowly. He was the only one in the huge laboratory. It was a pity that he could not share his joy with others. Dake could not help but miss the little monsters that were always by his side. It was a good thing that the magic elves were obsessed with their studies, but as their master, sometimes he would feel lonely. Dake closed his eyes. After half a minute, he opened his eyes and injected magic into the magic card. After that, there were strands of information coming back from the magic card's internal feedback. Picture, fruit-eater bug. Card name, fruit-eater bug. Type, elf card. Level, race, plant. Attribute, grass/dragon. Magic power, 500. Attack, 0. Defense, 1000. Ultimate skills, gluttonous ghost, fright, retreat into shell, a 1-star magic elf with a defense of 1000. Dake blinked and looked at the card to make sure that he did not miss a single 0. It was indeed 1 star, with 0 attack and 1000 defense. For a 1-star magic guide elf, its 3 inconceivably strong attributes were indeed enough to shock anyone. As for its race, this magic elf with dragon attributes was classified as a plant. This meant that it was a part of a plant, much more than a part of a dragon. Maybe after evolution, it can change its race. Dake thought for a while and looked at its ultimate skill. The first ultimate skill was gluttonous ghost. It was undoubtedly the embodiment of greed. However, according to Dake's memory, gluttonous ghost was not a trait that had many uses. Generally speaking, it was a special characteristic that would cause a Pokemon to automatically consume the tree fruit when its HP dropped to a certain level. Obviously, this could not be used in reality. Therefore, under such circumstances, gluttonous ghost's effect would most likely change. Dake was a little curious and injected more magic to check it out. Gluttonous Ghost. When the magic elf's magic power is less than half, it can continuously eat to replenish its magic power. 3-in-1/6100 plus. 0139/233. It's the end of the month. If I don't vote, it'll be a waste. My heart hurts. Epsilon equals 3. Chapter 522. A sure kill skill that doesn't have much use in a magic duel. But it's a must-have for the gluttonous ghost. Dake's forehead seemed to be pulled down by 3 black lines. If the magic fairy could replenish its magic through food, then as long as it ate non-stop, every magic fairy could go on a trip as they wished. This meant that this fruit-gnawing bug had the potential to leave as it wished. Of course, that was if its crawling speed that was slower than a caterpillar could support it to leave the house. But after joking, Dake's expression quickly became serious. Although the sure kill skill, the gluttonous ghost, lacked practical use, its academic value was very high. Assuming that there was nothing wrong with the feedback from the card, it meant that the magic elf with the sure kill skill, gluttonous ghost, could convert any food into magic power. And food was all-encompassing and could include almost all substances. This meant that the fruit-gnawing bug had the special ability to convert all substances into magic. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. If this special ability could be developed and used. For example, the magic pens that mages usually used were mercury shafts. Sometimes, they would change it to magic potions or blood and other substances to write. However, if the fruit-eating bug could convert the magic potions or blood used in the magic pen into pure magic power and then use it to write, the significance of this could be said to be a revolution in magic technology. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. If the sure kill skill, the gluttonous ghost, could be developed and simulated, it would mean that the method of obtaining magic would become extremely cheap. And once the method of obtaining magic became cheap, then there would be the possibility of it becoming widespread. Just like how thousands of households used electricity, when that time came, this world might become a world where everyone could use magic. 4 magic conductors. Magic power was the electricity of magic conductors. Although this idea had the possibility of being realized, it was obviously too idealistic and was far from being considered at the moment. Even if countless fruit-gnawing bugs were created and connected together like an electric circuit, there was no guarantee that they would be able to provide a steady supply of magic that would not be lost. Therefore, Dake thought for a moment and continued to look at the next sure kill skill. Fruit-eating bug had a total of 3 sure kill skills. Other than gluttonous ghost, there were fright and shrink into shell. But these 2 sure kill skills, Dake was very familiar with fright, because Little Dream Demon also knew this ultimate skill and often used it to scare people. Even if he didn't summon the fruit-eating bug to test it out, he could actually guess the effect of the fruit-eating bug's sure kill skill. It was the same level of shock as when a caterpillar suddenly emerged from a red apple. As for the other sure kill skill, shrink into the shell, it was better to call it shrink into an apple. However, among the 3 sure kill skills of the fruit-eating bug, shrink into the shell was undoubtedly the most powerful. Its effect was basically the same as rounding, which meant that it increased basic defense by 50%. This meant that the fruit-eating bug could use this sure kill skill to increase its defense, which was already much higher than 1 star, to a full 1,500 points. People who were used to seeing high-star magic guide fairies might think that 1,500 points of defense wasn't high, but in fact, it was already the peak value that a 3-star magic guide fairy could achieve. Its strength was unquestionable. In short, although this fruit-eating bug doesn't have any attack ability, its life-saving ability isn't weak. As a 1-star magic guide fairy, it also has a high defense comparable to a 3-star magic guide fairy. This characteristic can make it an indispensable character in the deck. In the sacrificial summoning system, a high-star magic guide fairy needed a low-star magic guide fairy as a sacrifice. In other words, only 2 3-star magic guide fairies couldn't summon a 5-star magic guide fairy. Therefore, if one wanted to increase the error rate, 1, 2-star, and 3-star magic guide fairies were essential. Of course, there were also people who would choose to only store 3-star, 6-star, and 9-star magic guide fairies in the deck to deal with the magic guide duel. That was indeed a good choice. However, it was only suitable for archmages who had a large number of powerful magic guide fairy cards. In fact, there were very few archmages who had that kind of surplus. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summoned the fruit-eating bug. After grasping a little information about the fruit-eating bug, Dake chanted the usual summoning spell and summoned it first. The fruit-eating bug's appearance looked like a red apple, but the apple revealed the eyes and tail of a green insect hidden inside. Its eyes looked like the apple's stem. The bottom half of the apple also had a yellow pattern like a mouth, and there were 2 small fong-like protrusions. Compared to a normal apple, it was a little bigger and weighed half a kilogram. Crunch! Dake held the fruit-eating bug with both hands and carefully observed it. The magic guide fairy that had just been born in this world tilted its head, and its eyes revealed a curious surprise. Then, like a chick that saw its mother, it used the cold apple to rub against his palm. It was hard to imagine that its original body was the green insect in the apple. Dake held it with his left hand and used his other hand to poke the apple's outer shell, and found that it had a reaction. If he gently rubbed the apple's outer shell, it would even squint its eyes in enjoyment. It was obvious that the apple had already become a part of its body. With the fruit-eating bug's current shape, it couldn't even pick up a pen, let alone take an exam after learning. Compared to the trash slime that could squeeze out tentacles from its body, its learning path might be more difficult. Well, there will be a way when the car reaches the mountain, and there will be a way when the boat reaches the bridge. There will be a way. Moreover, not all magic guide fairies are suitable for learning. Although Dake had the mentality of a parent and wanted all magic guide fairies to be able to grasp the basic knowledge, he wouldn't force it if he encountered one that couldn't learn. The fruit-eating bug had no limbs or telekinesis, and it couldn't even flip through a book. It was indeed too difficult for it to learn. Of course, he would think about it after further observation. Perhaps this greedy fruit-eating bug would be full of thirst for knowledge? Although the probability of it craving an apple was higher. Dake showed a sincere smile, and then rubbed the fruit-eating bug's skin for a while. The fruit-eating bug was really cute on the outside. As long as he forgot that it was a green insect, he wouldn't get tired of rubbing it. However, now wasn't the time to be lovey-dovey with it. Dake rubbed the fruit-eating bug's little tail and took out the prepared Greed 3. He waved it in front of it and smiled. Do you know what this is? Crunch. The fruit-eating bug shook the apple that acted as its eyes and used its tail to push the apple in the direction of Greed 3. Its eyes revealed greed. Perhaps it didn't know what this magic guide card was used for, but it instinctively wanted to possess it. Dake put Greed 3 on its apple and slowly cast a normal summoning spell. Let me see what you will evolve into. The fruit-eating bug's body was quickly surrounded by the blue-purple light of greed. Dake looked at it expectantly. As the light released by Greed 3 was completely absorbed by the fruit-eating bug, the light of the greed emblem appeared in its apple. However, the greed emblem wasn't engraved on the apple. Obviously, it was engraved on its body. Then, the light of evolution burst out from its body, and its whole body was surrounded by the light again. The fruit-eating bug's life form underwent a drastic change. Dake saw very clearly that cracks appeared on the surface of the apple, just like an eggshell cracking. The bug, turned into a dragon magic guide sprite, opened the cracked apple shell. What appeared in Dake's palm was a green little lizard, whose body fused with the apple shell. Its front claws fused with part of the apple's skin to form the shape of a wing. Its eyes were yellow flakes, like the flesh of an apple, but with green eyelids that could open and close. The horns on the top of its head came out from the apple stem, and a piece of apple skin was attached to it like a hat. Its tail was connected to a larger piece of apple that looked like the bottom of an eggshell. It did look a little like a dragon. However, its body didn't change at all. It was still the size of an apple. When it curled up its body and pieced the broken apple skin back together, it could completely disguise itself as a whole apple. This skinny magic guide sprite was no doubt one of the evolved forms of the fruit-eating bug, Apple Wrapping Dragon. Apple Wrapping Dragon was the evolved form of the fruit-eating bug after it used sour apple. Compared to the round honey dragon, its body was thin and long, and its cheek pouch contained a strong acidic liquid that could cause burns. It's actually apple wrapping dragon? I thought that after using Greed 3's evolved form, it would be the fatter honey dragon. Dake couldn't help but rub his chin and think. It wasn't until the apple wrapping dragon spread its wings and flew away from his palm that he came back to his senses and quickly hugged it again. Crunch, the apple wrapping dragon, let out an affectionate cry, then stuck out its thin and long tongue and licked his face. Dake happily knocked on its little head and looked at its attributes. Compared to the fruit-eating bug baby that was more cute than useful, the evolved apple wrapping dragon should have better stats and ultimate skills. Card name, Apple Wrapping Dragon. Type, Sprite card. Level, ******. Race, Dragon. Attribute, Grass/Dragon. Magic power, 1600. Attack, 2000. Defense, 1000. Ultimate skills, Vitality, Gravitation, Dragon's Dive, Substitute. There was no doubt that this was a gold card. The evolution from the fruit-eating bug to the apple wrapping dragon caused this orange card to transform into an evolution. Moreover, its stats and sure kill skills had all undergone a huge change. Dake picked up the Apple Wrapping Dragon Magic Guide card and looked at it carefully. The Apple Wrapping Dragon star level was only 4 stars, which was the same as Ivan and the Little Devil's star level after their evolution. However, its race had changed from a plant species to a dragon species after its evolution. Although this kind of racial change was not unprecedented, it was still extremely rare. This meant that after the fruit-eating bug evolved into the apple wrapping dragon, the plant part was very small. Although its size was small, it was indeed a genuine dragon species. Its attributes did not change, and it had both the grass and dragon attributes. In other words, it needed to withstand the double suppression of the ice element. The ice element suppressed both the grass element and the dragon element. The apple wrapping dragon was very weak in front of the ice element magic guide fairy. After its 3 stats evolved, it finally had a huge increase. First of all, its magic power had increased from 500 to 1,600. This was still barely enough for a 4-star magic guide fairy. However, its attack power had jumped from 0 to 2,000 in an instant. This huge leap in strength meant that this was definitely an offensive-type magic guide fairy. This could be seen from the fact that its defense was still at 1,000 points when it was the fruit-eating bug. However, the true characteristics of magic guide fairies were usually hidden in their killing moves. Therefore, Dake immediately looked at its killing move. He first noticed that the apple wrapping dragon no longer had the killing move of the gluttonous ghost, and then he focused on looking at the killing move. The first killing move was Vitality. This was undoubtedly a killing move worthy of its name. Vitality, a magic guide fairy with vitality characteristics. When excited, its attack power will increase by 1.5 times, but the hit rate of physical attacks will decrease. Decrease the hit rate and increase the attack power. This is obviously a very violent passive skill. Dake frowned slightly and read carefully. Then he tasted the taste of greed from the excitement. It's very likely that after this killing move is used on the apple wrapping dragon, it will only be triggered when it's greedy. The greedy magic guide fairy stimulated its potential in order to obtain more, causing its attack power to increase explosively. Then it's a good match. Dake couldn't help but think. Vitality was originally a hidden characteristic of the apple wrapping dragon. Now that it had appeared as a passive skill, it had become a very bug-like killing move. The apple wrapping dragon's attack power was as high as 2,000 points. Once it was increased by 1.5 times, it would be 3,000 points. 3,000 points of attack was already the highest number that a 6-star magic guide fairy could reach. However, this 4-star apple wrapping dragon could permanently increase its attack power by 3,000 points when it was greedy. Compared to the 4-star Diru beast, this was equivalent to the effect of the divine holy ring, but the focus of the two was different. When Dake saw this, he couldn't help but feel happy. It was hard to imagine that the apple wrapping dragon, which was only 30 centimeters tall, could have such powerful attack power. If it was allowed to fly faster, it would probably be as terrifying as a missile. In its killing move column, there was also a Dragon's Dive. Dragon's Dive, the apple wrapping dragon, releases a terrifying murderous aura, threatening and attacking the opponent. Sometimes it will make the opponent cower. If the target is in the shrunk state, the power will be doubled. Dragon's Dive was a dragon-type killing move that had decent power. When any dragon type used this killing move, it would allow the natural dragon's aura to be strengthened for a short period of time, crushing the opponent on the spiritual level, causing the opponent to cower in fear. As for the additional effect of the shrunk state, although it was less applicable, it wasn't useless. Therefore, this killing move was very qualified and even excellent as a means to use it with 3,000 points of attack power. After Dake confirmed the effect of Dragon's Dive, he looked at the second killing move, Universal Gravity. This killing move that sounded extremely cool from the name was the unique killing move of the apple wrapping dragon. However, there was a huge difference between its name and its actual effect. This was because it wasn't a killing move that controlled gravity as most people thought. Instead, it was a killing move that summoned an apple. There was no doubt that it was named after Newton's understanding of gravitation. Universal gravity, the apple wrapping dragon, can summon an apple and make it fall rapidly from a high place. If it hits the target's defense will be reduced by 50%. Although universal gravity wasn't as powerful as Dragon's Dive, it was still quite good. Moreover, it had the additional effect of reducing defense. What was even more terrifying was that it could reduce defense by 50%. This meant that if a defense of 4,000 points could be reduced to 2,000 points, it could basically destroy the defense of most meat shields. With defense reduction and the 3,000 points of Dragon's Dive, once the apple wrapping dragon found an opportunity, it would be a massacre. It could be seen that although the apple wrapping dragon was small, it could nail its target to death like a nail. However, from Dake's perspective, he still had some unrealistic fantasies. For example, could the apple wrapping dragon learn how to control gravity? Perhaps there would be a slight chance of improving its knowledge? One had to know that for magic related to gravity, even if it was just a slight change in gravity, it would take a magician half a lifetime to learn and accumulate enough experience to qualify for entry. However, the apple wrapping dragon was born with the ability to understand gravity. It could be said that its talent tree was full. I wonder if the apple summoned by the apple wrapping dragon can be eaten? Dake looked at the apple wrapping dragon, flapping its wings, and couldn't ask this question. Next, he looked at the last sure kill skill, Substitute. Substitute was a sure kill skill. It was named because it could create a substitute that was exactly the same as oneself. It had a pivotal position in the Pokemon system. Substitute. Separate a quarter of one's maximum life force, magic, to create a substitute with a quarter of one's life force. It can be used to block the damage and effects of sure kill skills. If one's life force does not exceed a quarter of one's maximum life force, it cannot be used. The so-called substitute was like a wooden stake in ninjutsu. It could create a substitute to replace oneself when receiving an attack, and then let the substitute take all the damage while one could safely retreat. If one was proficient in it to the extreme, they could even split their attention to control the substitute, making it move and even attack like a clone. Although the substitute definitely couldn't be as strong as the main body and definitely couldn't use sure kill skills, if it could inherit the main body's attack and defense, in actual combat, it could be used as an attack support. Among the 4 sure kill skills of the apple wrapping dragon, the substitute wasn't any worse than vitality. As for how widely the substitute can be used, I still need to test its attack and defense abilities, as well as its duration. After carefully thinking about it, Dake began to test out the effects of the 4 sure kill skills. He started with vitality. Wanting to arouse the apple wrapping dragon's greed was so simple that it didn't even need to be done deliberately to achieve it. Seeing the attack value on the magic card change from 2,000 to 3,000, Dake couldn't help but inhale slightly. He then ordered the apple wrapping dragon to use its sure kill skill, universal gravity, and summon an apple. When the apple fell from the sky, Dake immediately realized that it was indeed relying on the acceleration of gravity to gain its speed. This meant that it wouldn't be difficult to dodge it. No one would stand in one place and wait for an apple to fall. The damage that the apple could cause was obviously related to the height at which it fell. If it was directly summoned from the top of the head, it could easily hit, but it would be difficult to deal damage. However, if it was just to use the apple to hit the head and reduce defense, it would be fine as long as it could guarantee a hit rate. After the apple fell to the ground, Dake bent down to pick it up. Judging from the fact that it was still intact even after falling to the ground, this apple was definitely inedible. Its appearance was no different from the fruit-eating bug, and it was clearly a magic creation. In less than half a minute, Dake saw the apple turn into magic and quickly dissipate. If Substitute also has such a duration, it won't be easy to deal with it. Dake frowned slightly and ordered the apple wrapping dragon to use its sure kill skill, Substitute. Then, the apple wrapping dragon's body immediately emitted a faint white light, and its magic instantly decreased by 400 points. Then, its body swayed and disappeared from its original position, appearing a short distance away. On the ground where it originally stood, there was a wood-like substitute. From the outside, this substitute looked exactly the same as the original. The only difference was that its eyes were dull, and its movements were stiff. It didn't have any spirituality, and it was even stiffer than a magic fairy with an intelligence level of 2.0. This meant that if Dake wanted to use it as a substitute, he had to control it himself. Dake told it his intentions. Then, the apple wrapping dragon carefully thought about it and stared at the substitute. Then, the substitute flapped its wings and gradually flew up. This meant that controlling the substitute to attack was also possible. It was just that it would be extremely difficult to control it in battle. Wait. Dake looked at the substitute and suddenly had an idea. Although Substitute consumed a quarter of its maximum life force, which was magic power for magic fairies, this quarter should be the lower limit. What if it separated more life force? Apart from not being able to use sure kill skills, Substitute's only weakness was its lack of life force. If enough life force was separated, could it pass off as genuine and deceive the opponent? In theory, it should be possible. Unfortunately, Substitute's cooldown is extremely long, and it will take a full hour to use it again. As he thought about it, Dake suddenly noticed that Substitute showed no signs of disappearing. Even when Apple Wrapping Dragon degenerated into a fruit-gnawing bug, Substitute still didn't disappear. Could it be? Dake ordered the fruit-gnawing bug to try to control the Apple Wrapping Dragon as he calculated the time. After waiting for Substitute's cooldown to end for an hour, Substitute suddenly disappeared. Before it disappeared, its magic power was extremely condensed, and it would only consume magic power when it moved. If it didn't move, it wouldn't consume magic power. With this sure kill skill, even the fruit-gnawing bug will be able to take the exam. Dake suddenly said excitedly, "Kali Kali." The fruit-gnawing bug, which didn't know what its master meant, let out a cheerful cry. In short, Dake was extremely satisfied with the ability that the fruit-gnawing bug obtained after evolving into Apple Wrapping Dragon. After he tidied up the laboratory, he took the fruit-gnawing bug to the dining hall and introduced the new cutie to the magic elves during lunch. Then, he entrusted the cutie to the special child-rearing master, Polymorph. Perhaps because the fruit-gnawing bug was a grass-type creature, it was naturally close to the trash slime and soon played together. "This is the magic elf that you refined with the dragon worm fruit?" Ms. Plant asked in surprise during the meal. Because the fruit-gnawing bug's appearance was too special, she recognized it at first glance. Dake nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, it went very smoothly. It's the magic elf that I wanted to refine. It's grass type." Ms. Plant sniffed and said, "It has the fresh and sweet smell of grass." Dake took the opportunity and said, "I want to assign the fruit-gnawing bug to your study group. Is that okay?" Ms. Plant was startled for a moment, then smiled and said, "Of course." It's just that I'm afraid it can't even flip through the teaching materials, and there's only 1 month left until the end of the month, and you're going out in the middle of the month." Dake smiled and said, "The fruit-gnawing bug's education is outside of the goal." "That's good." Ms. Plant nodded immediately and said, "I also want to see how the magic elf refined with the dragon worm fruit is similar to the dragon worm fruit." Dake smiled and didn't say anything. After lunch, he returned to the room with the magic elves. When he introduced the fruit-gnawing bug further, he prepared to use Greed 3 to evolve it into the apple-wrapping dragon. At the same time, he also let the apple-wrapping dragon try to separate more life force into the substitute. However, during this evolution, an unexpected situation occurred. The fruit-gnawing bug didn't evolve into the apple-wrapping dragon, but into another form, the honey dragon. Looking at the honey dragon in front of him, Dake couldn't help but reveal an extremely surprised expression. The magic elves also noticed his expression. After being given the responsibility of parenting, the polymorph transformed into a little Dake and asked in a childish voice, "Is there a problem? Are you busy?" Dake looked at the concerned faces of the magic elves and told them that the fruit-gnawing bug could use 2 types of apples to evolve into 2 different forms. Squeak! Little Ibu let out a cry of surprise and looked at the honey dragon with a much more affectionate expression. The honey dragon that was surrounded by the magic elves was almost 40 centimeters tall, and from the extent of its plumpness, it was obviously much bigger than when it was the fruit-gnawing bug or the apple-wrapping dragon. Dake reached out and weighed it, and found that it had become extremely heavy, at least 10 times heavier than the fruit-gnawing bug. The honey dragon had a shape similar to that of a turtle. Its bulging back was covered with woven fruit pie lace, and the top of its back still retained the eyelids of the fruit-gnawing bug, but in fact, the part of its head that drooped down like the ears were its real eyes. Compared to the apple-wrapping dragon that was sour and astringent, the honey dragon that could only evolve after using the sweet apple was wrapped in sweet honey, and it emitted a kind of mouth-watering sweet smell. Especially its back, it was like a fruit pie that was smeared with honey. If Dake's memory was not wrong, it seemed that it was indeed edible. Once he thought of this, Dake's finger was moved. But after considering the impact, he immediately gave up the tempting idea of tasting it. In short, after accepting the fact that the fruit-gnawing bug had inexplicably evolved into the honey dragon, Dake began to actively search for the reason that caused this situation. He then injected his magic power into the magic card that had undergone changes, and began to analyze it in depth. Card name, Honey Dragon. Type, Elf card. Level, *******. Race, Dragon. Attribute, Grass/Dragon. Magic power, 1600, Attack. 1400, Defense. 1600. Ultimate skills, Apple Sour, Growth, Iron Wall, Spinning Top Ball, compared to the Apple Wrapping Dragon that emphasized attack, the Honey Dragon. S3 attributes were obviously more balanced. However, Dake actually preferred the Apple Wrapping Dragon's attribute distribution method. Being too balanced meant that there was no special characteristic. He originally thought that the Honey Dragon would be a magic elf with full defense, but it was not. Moreover, its magic power and attack were not up or down, which was a little awkward. If there was anything that was worth consoling, it would be that it was also a gold card that had 4 ultimate skills. Among the 4 ultimate skills of the Honey Dragon, the first one was similar to the Apple Wrapping Dragon's Universal Gravity. It was an exclusive ultimate skill that only the Honey Dragon could learn in Pokemon, Apple Sour. Apple Sour. Attack with an acidic liquid extracted from a sour apple. While dealing damage to the target's defense will be reduced by 50%. Both of them lowered defense, but Apple Sour was more practical than Universal Gravity. It was basically like a jet of water that was shot out from the Honey Dragon's mouth. In terms of hit rate, it was higher than Universal Gravity. Moreover, according to the acid reserves in its body, it could shoot continuously or multiple times. Compared to the 50% defense reduction, Apple Sour's power was barely enough. It could only be said to be the icing on the cake. As for his second sure kill skill, it was Growth. Growth. Allow the body to grow in an instant, thereby obtaining a stronger physique. Attack and defense will be increased by 50%. Honey Dragon grow. Dake suddenly commanded. Eh. The honey dragon turned its head and let out a puzzled cry. However, it very obediently used the ultimate skill that was engraved in its instincts: growth. Then, its body, which was larger than the fruit-gnawing worm and the apple-wrapping dragon, but was still only 40 centimeters tall, suddenly expanded. When it stopped growth, it had become a 2-meter-tall rideable dragon. Dake could not help but open his mouth. This growth, ultimate skill, regardless of whether it was the effect or the way it was presented, shocked him greatly. The 2-meter-tall honey dragon's visual deterrence was obviously not something that its original form could compare to. After increasing its attack and defense by 50%, the honey dragon's attack had reached 2,100 points, and its defense had reached 2,400 points. Moreover, these high values obtained through growth were the same as the Holy Ring, which was a basic attribute. This meant that after it used its third ultimate skill, Iron Wall, it would obtain an extremely terrifying increase in defense. Iron Wall. Make the skin as hard as iron, greatly increasing its own defense. The increase is 100% of the base defense. Compared to round shape and shrink into shell, the increase in defense was even more terrifying. Under Grow, the meaty dragon's defense could reach up to 4,800 points, even surpassing the fat penguin that Angus Jeffrey was so proud of. However, this kind of super increase came at the price of a decrease in the duration of the skill. After Dake ordered the Iron Wall, he realized that before Iron Wall disappeared, its body was rapidly shrinking, and it had already exited growth mode. The effect of Iron Wall did not last long either. The duration of these two ultimate skills were different. Growth could only last for 1 round, which was 30 seconds. On the other hand, Iron Wall could last for 2 rounds, which was 60 seconds. After the honey-rich dragon exited its growth state, just the effect of Iron Wall alone increased its defense to a high of 3,200 points. Although it's a little faster, it's still acceptable compared to the peak defense it can reach in a short period of time. Dake was in a good mood, so he looked at the last ultimate skill, Spinning Top. Spinning Top. Make the body spin at high speed and hit the opponent. The slower the speed, the more powerful the attack. The maximum damage is increased to 1.5 times the base damage. Spinning Top's base damage was 100 points. As long as the magic guide fairy was slow enough, its damage could be increased to 150 points. The most famous ultimate skill with 150 points of damage was Death Ray of Destruction. This was a super ultimate skill that would stun the target for 1 round after it was released. Spinning Top, on the other hand, did not have this side effect. With the Spinning Top's size and weight, its original speed was as slow as a turtle's crawl. If it used growth to increase its size, its speed would be even slower. This meant that most of the time, it could maximize the power of Spinning Top. Apple Wrapping Dragon and Honey Dragon's attributes and ultimate skills each had their own merits. Compared to Apple Wrapping Dragon, which had Substitute's ultimate skill, Honey Dragon not only had a good attack power, but it also had a much better defense. The only problem was that its stamina was too short. Magic guide fairies that lacked stamina were not very suitable for actual combat. However, they could often shine in a magic guide duel that could decide the winner in a short period of time. However, Honey Dragon, which did not have Substitute's ultimate skill, could not allow the Fruit Eater to gain testability after training. This was too regretful. In order to allow the Apple Wrapping Dragon to gain testability at critical moments, it was very necessary to thoroughly study its evolution mechanism. What exactly was the reason for it to evolve into Apple Wrapping Dragon and Honey Dragon? Combining the different situations during the 2 evolutions, Dake fell into deep thought. Before the lunch break ended, he gradually had a clue. Compared to the situation when the Fruit Eater evolved into Apple Wrapping Dragon, there was obviously a very big difference when the Fruit Eater evolved into Honey Dragon. That was also something that was very easy to associate with gluttony, the ultimate skill. When it evolved into Honey Dragon, it was in a satiated state. However, could it be that satiation was the only thing that determined its evolution form? It's not gluttony's magic guide fairy. The probability of this is actually not high. But if it's negated, what could be the reason for the difference? Dake continued to think. Perhaps satiation isn't the final reason that determines its evolution form, but the reason that causes a certain state. Because it was satiated, the fruit eater obtained the corresponding state and evolved into Honey Dragon. Yes, that should be the case. Dake's eyes flashed as he realized that he was gradually getting closer to the truth. Then, what would it feel after it was satiated? The most common feeling, of course, would be satisfaction. The fruit eater is a magic guide fairy refined from the fruit of greed. Most of the time, it would be in a greedy state, which means it doesn't know how to be satisfied. But after it was satiated, at least for a short period of time, it would definitely obtain a certain degree of satisfaction. And it was that satisfaction that allowed it to evolve into Honey Dragon, under the effect of Greed 3. That should be the reason. Dake couldn't help but feel a little excited. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that his guess was correct. The newly refined fruit eater was in a very hungry state. Although it was difficult to show it because of its appearance, it was definitely full of greed for most things. Therefore, after using Greed 3, the fruit eater evolved into Apple Wrapping Dragon. And after eating its fill in the afternoon, the fruit eater was temporarily satisfied, its greed was temporarily suppressed, and it evolved into Honey Dragon. If that was really the case, it meant that these two evolution forms were relatively controllable. In other words, the testability was achieved. 5 in 1 10,000 plus. 0142/233. Thank you, baby, for the Silver Treasure Chest reward. Thank you, baby, for the 12 monthly votes. Thank you, baby, for the magnanimity. There are only 3 days left until the end of July. Brothers, if you don't vote now, it will be a waste. I'm worried sick. Chapter 523. After the initial speculation, the next step was to verify it. Dake was not cruel enough to let the newly born fruit gnawing bug go into a stressful learning environment that afternoon. Even if he threw it into a classroom, it would not understand anything. Later in the night, Ms. Cook would give it one-on-one tutoring to help it master some basic reading and writing skills. As for how to turn pages, hopefully, it would be able to use its tail well. After lunch, Dake used Greed 3 on the fruit gnawing bug every hour to verify the reason for the evolution. Along the way, he fed the fruit gnawing bug, massaged it, and told it stories. This satisfied the fruit gnawing bug and made it evolve multiple times. At night, Dake finally confirmed that his speculation was correct. The evolution of the fruit gnawing bug depended on its level of greed before it evolved. Once the fruit gnawing bug grew and mastered the ability to control its emotions for a short period of time, it would be able to determine the final evolution form by itself. However, that would be a long time in the future. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. 6. After Dake gave the fruit gnawing bug to his tutors, he continued to write Mathematics 2. After absorbing Great Sins, Kiran continued to draw Pride. On the 3rd and 4th of August, he drew Pride twice in 2 nights, obtaining a total of 3 points. His remaining index was 91 points, and his reserve for Pride was at 29 points. He was only 1 point away from 30 points. However, since he hadn't finished writing Mathematics 2, he wasn't in a hurry to draw the Pride on the night of August 5th. Instead, he decided to draw the Bliss instead. On the 5th and 6th of August, he drew twice. Bliss went from 93 points to 90 points and his reserve reached 5 points. He could use it to cultivate the fruit of bliss. However, Dake still did not make a move. On the evening of the 7th of August, he drew 5 points from Pride, which had slightly increased, and brought Pride's reserve to 5 points. At this time, he was once again faced with the dilemma of not being able to do anything. However, before greed was triggered, he didn't want to trigger rage or gluttony. Therefore, he had to choose between pride and bliss. After careful consideration, he temporarily chose pride. On the one hand, leveling up pride was relatively easy. On the other hand, he was also worried that his 35 points of pride would not be enough. It was better to have more in reserve just in case. Therefore, after a series of operations, he continuously drew pride 3 times in the remaining 3 nights, raising his reserve to 35 points. At this time, the writing of Mathematics 2 was coming to an end. August 10th, late at night. Dake didn't feel sleepy at all as he continued to write. Finally, at 3:30 a.m., he had filled in the last part of the book. In that instant, he felt as if his entire being had been sublimated. It was as if he could see an angel smiling when he closed his eyes. If she recalled carefully, he didn't seem to have been this serious during the college entrance examination. However, this had something to do with the fact that mathematics was his strength. But on the whole, it had the most to do with one's mentality. During the college entrance examination, he was forced to work hard. But now, he was actively working hard. This caused concentration and mobility to be in 2 completely different states. I'll save it for when I'm free. Dake relaxed as he put down his pen. After a simple wash, he crawled into bed. When Dake woke up again, it was already 10 a.m. on August 11th. Olga noticed that he had woken up, so she pushed the dining cart in. Dake finished his breakfast in the bedroom and pushed the door open. He needed to confirm the name of the Mage Guild and the 2 magic guide fairies today and tomorrow. Then, he would register with Claire on Monday. Where's Auntie Claire? Admiring the flowers in the garden. Olga's quick reply made Doc stunned for a moment. He subconsciously said, Aunt Claire, why are you so free? However, halfway through his sentence, he realized something and couldn't help but shut his mouth. Claire Kate was originally just an ordinary girl who liked reading books and small animals. She came from the clubhouse of fools. She wasn't as special as Scarlet Blood Concubine, nor was she as popular as Arvette. It was the magical animal society that allowed her to enter the circle of the golden generation. It was the war that allowed her to gain experience that she didn't want. War hero, sage of beasts. There were many other titles that she didn't want. Her dream was to read on the balcony and live an ordinary and stable life with her family and friends. But being born in that era, everyone had no choice. After returning to the Duke's mansion for half a year, Claire seemed to have regained some of the feelings of her school days. She set up a deck chair in the flower-filled garden under the tree of diesel that had already grown. It was rare for her to enjoy the peace of reading a book. It's already so big? Dake's voice sounded behind her. Claire didn't turn around. Instead, she smiled and said, It's growing fast, isn't it? Looks like Olga took good care of it. In just 2 months, the tree of diesel in front of her had grown to the size of an adult banyan tree. The branches and leaves that extended outwards like clouds formed a perfect sunshade. Sitting under the tree of diesel, one's chaotic emotions would naturally be absorbed, and one would become tranquil. Its leaves had the ability of thought imprint, while its branches could be used to create high-level thinking bottles. It was full of treasures. Looks like it's time to reap the rewards. Dake sized up the tree of diesel in front of him and began to choose the thick branches to create thinking bottles. Now, he didn't have enough thinking bottles, and even the wormwood tree was filled to the brim every day. If he could obtain a large number of high-level thinking bottles that had a shelf life of 3 months and a capacity of 30 drops, he wouldn't have to worry about the storage of great sins for a long time. Claire saw through his thoughts and said, I'll let the people in the mansion try to create high-level thinking bottles, but the process is very complicated. I'm afraid you can only make one before you go to school. But after mastering the specific method, you should be able to speed it up. If you can arrange for either Eve or Aaron to enter Traveler Street, I can send you a few more. One is enough for now. Dake nodded. Then, he looked at the leaves of the tree of diesel and suddenly said, If these leaves are cut into the style of a notebook and the surface color is white, it should be very popular, right? Claire looked up and said, using the leaves of the tree of diesel to make notebooks? That's a good idea. The leaves of the tree of diesel are indeed natural imprints. They can imprint the scenes in one's mind onto the leaves and can be used repeatedly. If it's sold in the academy, there's no need to worry about the user's mental strength not being enough. Dake smiled and said, with this, we won't have to worry about copying books on the blackboard in class. If the price is right, it should be a popular product. Claire said, if Eve and Erin want to open a shop in Traveller Street, they do need a qualified product as a foundation. I think it'll work. Dake replied, first, we'll use the imprints to stabilize the business. Then, after the dual cards and dual discs are developed, we'll build the shop in the academy into a shop exclusively for the academy. I'm looking forward to the day when duel games replace magic chess. Claire asked curiously, for a mage, can a simplified duel game replace the charm of a magic duel? Dake shook his head and said, obviously not. But the magic duel isn't our product. Students can't randomly find people to duel in the academy. Our duel disc is mainly targeted at magic chess. And because of the source of the cards, it's a product for fans. Claire, for fans. Dake smiled and said, I think everyone in the academy will want to summon the celestial white dragon with their own hands, right? Even if it's just a projection. The two chatted and laughed, and half an hour passed in the blink of an eye. Then, Dake remembered the purpose of his visit. He said, speaking of which, have you decided on a name for the club? International Projection Club. Forget it, I also feel that this name isn't very down-to-earth. International Projection Club was actually derived from the International Illusion Club. It was the company name of the inventor of the dual monster card game in Yu-Gi-Oh!, Bekas J. Crofter. However, the current world didn't actually have the concept of a company. The existing chambers of commerce and associations were only the embryonic form of a company. The various models and rules were still imperfect. The word international was also a rare word. Naming it International Projection Club wasn't even as good as National Projection Club. If they went one step further, they might just name it National Duel Club. It would be more intuitive. And if they didn't use duel as the theme, there was no need to name it. Claire obviously had the same idea. She said, I've thought of a lot of names these days, and I've also asked Yvette for her opinion. The name she's more inclined to is Dake Cat Club. What do you think? Dake almost couldn't breathe. Dake Cat Club wasn't as good as Dake No Need Club. Claire chuckled and said, okay, I'm just kidding. What I mean is that we can think of two names. One will be a branch club specializing in duel games, and the other will be the main club behind the scenes. Isn't this a collectivization? Dake couldn't help but be surprised. This is a very good idea. In that case, the branch club specializing in duel games can be named National Duel Club. It's simple, straightforward, and down-to-earth. National Duel Club. Claire thought carefully for a long time and felt that it was feasible. After the two reached an agreement, they continued to think of the name of the group. When Claire heard the concept of group from Dake, she said directly, then let's call it Dake Cat Group. Dake's forehead darkened. He said, let's just call it the Cat Club. Claire, Cat Club, not bad. Dake, in short, the name of the main club didn't need to be so rushed. As the two talked, they talked about the names of the two magic elves. Claire interrupted Dake's previous idea and directly made a decision. I think the name Phoenix is feasible. Phoenix is a good name. But the name of the vampire's daughter needs to be changed. It's not good to use Ophelia's previous name. Dake nodded slightly. This was one of his goals. When he thought of naming the vampire's daughter Olivia, it was just a spur of the moment. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not feasible. Therefore, he also thought of a new name in the midst of his busy work. Then, how about Victoria Dimming? Claire thought for a moment and asked, does this name have any meaning? Dake smiled slightly and said, it's the goddess of victory, the symbol of prosperity, and the inspiration of a brilliant era. Victoria was a word that was remembered by the era. However, it was not in this world. In that world, the reign of Queen Victoria of the Great Eagle Empire was called the Victorian era. The waves of scientific inventions in that era were surging. People believed in scientific progress and were full of optimism and confidence in the Industrial Revolution. Even the art world was filled with dazzling stars. Countless great writers, poets, and their works had emerged. The unique Victorian style had even continued to this day. The moral concept of the Victorian era included a high degree of moral integrity and a detailed code of language and behavior. When all these factors were combined, they formed a prosperous and peaceful era. Yes, just like this era in this world. Dake named the vampire's daughter Victoria. It was his hope for the future of the vampire's daughter, and also for the beautiful expectations of this era. Claire didn't recognize anything wrong with the name, so she readily agreed. After the two sides reached a consensus on this point, they began to discuss the identity registration of the two magic elves. As for the registration of the National Duel Club, Claire had already taken care of it. She had been hesitant and had not completed the name registration. If that's the decision, we'll go register in the afternoon. Claire smiled and closed the book. She then returned to the mansion with Dake. Then it was quickly after lunch. Dake called maid Teacher Vignan and ordered her to take care of the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's appearance. The identity registration required a photo. As girls, of course, they had to show their best side. The vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter had already prepared beforehand. Dake had also communicated with them when he was naming them. But now that things had come to a head, the two were still a little nervous. Or the proof of identity meant that they were no longer pure magic elves. This kind of change in identity brought about daily changes that would be reflected in all aspects. The most important change was the upcoming entrance test. Once they successfully passed the entrance test, they would enter the Shang-Malian Academy as individuals and become first-year students. When the time came for them to be assigned dorms, it meant that they would have to live separately from Dake. This did not affect the phoenix's daughter, who was not Dake's magic elf. But the vampire's daughter had never left Dake's side since she was born. Sometimes when she thought about it in the dead of night, she would be a little scared. What's more, according to the rules of the Shang-Malian Academy, the probability of them being assigned to the aristocratic academy was almost zero. Although not everyone in the aristocratic academy was a pure-blooded aristocrat, the two magic elves without any trace of human blood could not meet the requirements to enter the aristocratic academy. This meant that not only would they have to be separated from Dake in two different dorms, but they would also have to be separated into two different academies. Because of this, the vampire's daughter even had some instinctive rejection of the matter of entering the aristocratic academy. But considering that the phoenix's daughter also wanted to enter the aristocratic academy, she also wanted to respond to her master's expectations. That little rejection could only be hidden in her heart. Moreover, she actually had some small expectations of living alone. A person's state of mind was always in conflict. From this point, the vampire's daughter was clearly no different from a real human. The two magic elves were naturally beautiful, and after a little bit of decoration by Teacher Vignan, they were even more exquisite and charming. The vampire's daughter looked young, but considering the Shang-Malian Academy's age limit, Dake was still prepared to register her as 11 years old. As for the phoenix, who looked older, it was estimated that she would register at 12 years old. After the two magic elves were dressed up, they had the same hairstyle and changed into similar clothes. One's hair color was pink like cherry blossoms, while the other's hair color was crimson like flames. But overall, they belonged to the same color system. When the two of them stood together, they looked like a pair of sisters. "Are you ready?" Dake looked up and down and asked. "Let's go, let's go." The vampire's daughter pouted and said. The phoenix's daughter only slightly nodded. Yvette was not in the Duke's mansion, so she naturally could not accompany them today. This made her feel a little disappointed. Dake saw that she was in low spirits, so he said to her, "Phoenix, do you like this name?" The phoenix's face was cold as usual, and she slightly nodded. Dake smiled and said, "It's good that you like it." This is the name that Mother and I came up with together." The phoenix's expression was moved, and her face instantly relaxed. Dake turned around and glanced at the vampire's daughter. He said, "The city hall is quite far from the mansion. We need to hurry." The vampire's daughter immediately understood. She reached out and grabbed the phoenix's arm, then bounced and followed his footsteps. Claire watched the whole process and only smiled. The dragon tamer guards were already waiting outside the Duke's mansion in a dragon horn carriage. The group of people left the mansion and directly boarded the carriage. Including Olga, a total of 5 people squeezed into the carriage, but it still did not seem crowded. The vampire's daughter had just sat down, and she chattered about the registration process. Dake said that he did not know, and the vampire's daughter pestered Claire. Claire could only put down the book that she had just picked up and patiently explained. The city hall did not have a 2-day break, or it could be said that the 2-day break was the busiest time for such official business. Those public officials generally used a shift system. Originally, people like the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter were completely unregistered and did not have the qualifications to register at all. However, they were going to register with the surname Dim-eng, which made everything different. After a 2-hour ride, the Dragonhorn carriage stopped in the open space outside the city hall, and the group of 5 people got off one after another. Dake raised his head and glanced at the majestic city hall, then took the lead and walked into the hall. The public officials in the city hall seemed to have already heard of some rumors. The staff in charge of receiving VIPs saw his face and quivered, then hurriedly went up to greet him. Everything went smoothly after that. No one would provoke a duke's son for no reason, not to mention that the duke was Yvette St. Dimming. Under these circumstances, the registration process, which originally took about a week to complete, was completed in only half an hour. After another half an hour, the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter successfully received their ID cards. Although the surname of the 2 magic elves was Dimming, in terms of kinship, they were the daughters of a family member who had already passed away. On the surface, they were fostered in the Duke's mansion and were Dake's cousins. For the time being, there was no clear distinction between cousins and cousins in this world. Whether it was uncle's daughter or uncle's daughter, they all used the same term. In addition, at the same time that they received their ID cards, the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter also had their birthdays. The vampire's daughter was born on the night of April 1st to April 2nd. Since it was past midnight, it was registered as April 2nd. As for the phoenix's birth time, since Yvette did not specifically remember the exact time, Dake simply set it as April 2nd as well. When the time came, the 2 sisters' birthdays would be celebrated together. Wouldn't that be perfect? In short, when they took their ID cards and left the city hall, their faces were filled with joy. Today was obviously an extraordinary day for them. Before the sky turned dark, the 5 people took the carriage back to the Duke's mansion. Then, the vampire's daughter immediately pulled the phoenix's daughter and ran into Dake's room in high spirits, sharing her joy with the other magic elves. Although the magic elves were inevitably a little jealous, they were also happy for them. However, when it came to birthdays, many of the magic elves' expressions changed slightly. Since Dake held a birthday party not long after returning home, the magic elves were very clear about the meaning of birthdays. Now that the vampire's daughter and phoenix's daughter had their own birthdays, what about them? After they gained sentience, most of them could remember their own birthdays. However, if every magic elf had to celebrate their birthdays, when Dake had more magic elves in the future, wouldn't he have to celebrate their birthdays 365 days a year? But while the magic elves were worried about this, Dake and Claire were also talking about the same topic. As the saying goes, one does not worry about scarcity, but about inequality. When the magic elves gained sentience, they could no longer be treated as magic elves. The moment the vampire's daughter and phoenix's daughter received their ID cards, Dake had a deeper understanding of this point. In the future, if he only celebrated their birthdays, it would definitely lead to family discord. "So what are you going to do?" Claire asked with a teasing tone. But Dake had been thinking about this problem on the way back to the mansion. He said with a straight face, "Then let's set a collective birthday." Claire asked curiously, "April 2nd? Dake shook his head and said, June 6th. Claire gaped. Your birthday? Yes. Dake nodded. I thought about it, and this is the only day that won't cause any disputes. From next year onward, my birthday will be their birthday. If we celebrate together, no one will object, right? Claire gaped and couldn't help but chuckle. What a lousy idea. Dake asked, Isn't it good? Claire shrugged. It's all right. The two of them entered the dining room, sat down at the table, and began to discuss their next itinerary. The Ultimate Duel Club would complete the final registration of names tomorrow. The ones in charge of this matter were Eve and Erin, who had been poached from the Scorpio Palace maid group. This time, the two of them would be heading to the Shang Malian Academy to take part in the entrance test. We definitely won't make it in time to take the magic car. So this time, we're going to ride the wyverns. This way, we can reach the Shang Malian Academy in just one day. A wyvern can only carry 2 people at most, so we need at least 4 wyverns. Are you going to ride the wyvern with me, or the dragon tamer guards? Claire said while tapping the table with her knuckles. After Dake listened carefully, he said decisively, Of course, the dragon tamer guards. Of course, you're going to ride with me, right? Claire slammed the table. My wyvern is stable and fast, which the dragon tamer guards can't compare to. I heard that the first time you rode a wyvern to the academy, you fainted? Don't worry, with me around, nothing similar will happen again. Dake couldn't help but smile awkwardly. The matter of the dragon fainting at the beginning of the semester could no longer be hidden. In fact, his dragon fainting wasn't that serious. If he had stuck a Karsic sticker made of a spiral leaf on his temple before riding the wyvern, it would have been much easier. At that time he was actually scared. However, Claire's hospitality was hard to refuse. In order to not let her continue to investigate and expose more facts, Dake had to reluctantly agree. Since it only takes 1 day to arrive on the wyvern, should we leave on the 13th or 14th? He immediately asked. Claire rested her chin on her hand and thought, under normal circumstances, it would be better to arrive a day earlier. The Shang Malian entrance test isn't easy, so it's best to collect some information in advance. Also, we need to know who our opponents are. Dake. Opponents. Aha. Claire nodded and said, The Academy can't issue invitations to everyone in the world who meets the entrance requirements, so they provide an additional entrance application channel. Every year at this time, thousands of soldiers and horses cross the single-plank bridge. Thousands of children of the right age will gather in the small town outside the academy from all over the world. Some parents who lack means of communication will go to the small town a week or even half a month in advance. During this time, they will submit an application to the person in charge of the academy, which is actually the first round of screening. Dake pondered, will the Shang Malian Academy conduct a preliminary examination of their identity and background? Claire said, yes. Under normal circumstances, this round alone will eliminate 80% of the people. Dake couldn't help but frown. Why so many? Claire said calmly, because some things are a threshold that can't be crossed, such as the talent for magic power. Those who don't have enough talent for magic power won't be able to pass the entrance test, even if they pass the first round of screening through other means. Dake frowned. Like Eve and Irene? Claire said, the two of them were eliminated, not because they didn't have enough talent for magic power, but because they didn't have enough talent for magic. Dake couldn't help but ask, what's the difference between talent for magic power and magic? Claire shrugged and said, I'm not too sure about that. However, the Shang Malian Academy has a complete set of measurement methods that can be used to grade the talent for magic. Of course, for magisters, as long as they can cross that threshold, their future achievements won't have a decisive relationship with their talent for magic. Dake agreed, although the threshold for magic is lower than that for magicians, in the end, both paths lead to the same destination. They both need to grasp profound knowledge in order to continue to improve. Claire changed the topic again. In addition, the Shang Malian Academy's entrance test actually has a quota limit. Dake said, I know that. In each year, there are only about 40 students in each branch. This means that the number of students admitted each year is actually only 160. And among these 160 people, some of them have directly received an invitation to enter the academy, so they can enter without taking the test. Claire shook her head. It's not just that. The academy will, to a certain extent, estimate the number of students in each branch to ensure that the final number of students admitted will be evenly distributed. Also, what do you think of the House of Fools? Considering that Claire was born in the House of Fools, Dake repeated the Academy's words. Although the students of the House of Fools don't have the courage of knights or the wisdom of magisters, they are innocent and pure, so they have the greatest possibility. Claire smiled helplessly at his cleverness and said, Actually, in the House of Fools, apart from the students who fit the characteristics of the fool, there are also a large number of students that the other branches can't accommodate. Dake frowned and said, But isn't the placement of students decided by the branch card during the ceremony? Claire smiled. The branch card is made by the academy. Dake couldn't help but be silent. However, as long as one could enter the Shang Malian Academy, no matter which branch they were assigned to, they would be able to enjoy the same educational resources. There was no essential difference between the House of Fools and the House of Nobles. After the two of them finished their discussion, the magic guide fairies were led into the dining hall by the supervising maids. The news that the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter had obtained their ID cards caused a stir among the magic elves for about a quarter of an hour. After that, most of the magic elves immediately dove into the tide of revision. Yes. The second stage of the test was tomorrow. Although tomorrow was the weekend, this matter was urgent. According to Dake's original plan, if he were to take the magic car to the Shang Malian Academy, he would leave tomorrow. At that time, he would temporarily leave the other magic elves in the Duke's mansion to take the test, except for the Phoenix. After all, the Phoenix wasn't his magic elf, so he couldn't summon her to his side. Therefore, he could only bring her with him. As for the other magic elves, they could stay in the mansion for 24 hours before the effects of Paradise and Zoo wore off. If he were to ride a dragon, this plan would only need to be changed slightly. As long as the tutors worked overtime after tomorrow's test, not only would the Phoenix be able to participate in the test, but he would also be able to see the results of the magic elves before he left the day after tomorrow. This would be very useful for Dake to further understand the learning situation of the vampire's daughter and the Phoenix. That night, Dake took out the textbook of Mathematics 2 and began to examine it. Even though Bliss and Pride had more than enough reserves, he didn't plan to conduct his experiments in the next 2 days. In addition, he hadn't thought of how to use the Fruit of Bliss, so he could use this time to think about it. The next day, August 12th, Sunday, Claire, Eve, and Erin finally went to complete the final login of the Citizen Duel Club. From the moment the login was completed, the Dake's Cat Club, proposed, sub-club was officially established. However, there was only one member of the Citizen Duel Club. Although Dake Dim Eng claimed to be the future president, he wasn't 16 yet and couldn't join the club. Eve and Erin were only 14 years old and couldn't meet the conditions to join the club. But it was this incomplete society that was destined to bring a brand new atmosphere to this world. At the same time, the second stage of the Magic Elves test had also begun. Due to Camilla's participation, this stage of the test was much more convenient. The tutors began to grade the test papers after the end of each test. After working overtime, all the papers were marked by 8 o'clock that night. Dake checked the test scores of all the magic elves in the office. A total of 20 magic elves participated in the test, which meant that all the magic elves except for the newly joined fruit-gnawing bug had participated. He roughly flipped through the test papers of all the magic elves and focused on the one that belonged to Snorlax. Reading and writing, 36 points, arithmetic, 48 points, common sense, 34 points, history, 33 points, a total of 151 points. Not bad, you've improved. Dake relied on his strong self-control and successfully resisted the urge to tear the test paper into pieces. Cyrus squinted at his expression and said amiably, "You've improved after all. You'll pass with less than half the marks. You have to know that Snorlax didn't know anything a month ago and scored 0 in all 4 of its subjects. Compared to back then, it has improved tremendously. I even think that we should reward it with a big meal." An appropriate reward can nurture its interest in learning. Dake's expression relaxed and he said, "That's true." Then, he maintained a relatively calm state of mind and continued to look at the other test papers. The second stage of the test was obviously much more difficult than the first, but the Magic Elves' test results were better as a whole. Among them, Fairy Ibu and Duru Beast tied for first place with 396 points. Lion Beast and Ibu Chan overtook Little Fiend Beast and tied for third place with 388 points. Below them were Little Fiend Beast, Shapeshifter, Kettle Kettle, Big Milk Can, Meow Meow, and Secretary Magus. In other words, the top 10 didn't change at all. It was still the same 10 Magic Elves. The last 10 places were led by the Vampire's Daughter and the Phoenix Girl. It was obvious that under the pressure of the entrance test, these two humanoid Magic Elves were working hard and had made significant progress. The reason why they weren't able to enter the top 10 was because they had done too well. After that, Chocho Sea Lion, Dream Demon, Moon Lady, Hawkman Wrestling, Trash Slime, Cyanide Dragon, and Sword Scabbard all obtained acceptable results. It could be seen that after the last stage of the test, they had learned to be brave. At present, apart from Snorlax and the fruit-eating bug, the other Magic Elves' grasp of basic knowledge could be said to be passable. After returning from the academy, the tutors would teach them some special knowledge in the remaining 10 days, such as magic, martial arts, and even the 4 arts. Dake didn't have any restrictions in this aspect. It all depended on the tutors and the preferences of the Magic Elves. In the end, Dake took out Miss Vampire and Lady Phoenix's test papers and placed them on the table. He asked, "Miss Cook, with the current level of Miss Vampire and Lady Phoenix, can they pass the general basic knowledge test?" Miss Cook showed a slightly confident smile and said, "The two of them have mastered the basic knowledge quite well. Although I'm not too sure about the standards of the Shang Malian Academy's entrance test, as a preschool test, it shouldn't be more difficult than this test paper in theory." That's good. Dake thought, I need an analysis of the correct answers, so that they can correct the mistakes on the test paper when they arrive. Miss Cook quickly took out a roll of notes from the drawer and said, "These are my personal notes." Dake took the notes and flipped through them. He couldn't help but nod. There was no doubt about the level of detail of these handwritten notes. He could take all the Magic Elves with him and let them correct the mistakes according to these notes. But if he did that, he would have to bring too many test papers. Instead, it would be better to distribute the test papers tonight and let the 3 tutors guide them on the spot. If there wasn't enough time, he could use this answer to fill in the gaps. Thus, he told them his idea, and the 3 tutors readily agreed. 5 in 1 10,000 plus. 145 of 233, brothers. It's the last 2 days. If you don't vote for the monthly votes and the guaranteed blade, you'll be gone. Thank you for your monthly votes and blades. Asterisk. Heart Suit O. Star. Chapter 524. Even though the schedule was tight, there was still plenty of time to carry it out. Announcing the rankings, handing out the test papers, explaining the wrong questions. The total time taken didn't exceed 2 hours. Of course, this was the result of excluding Little Snorlax's incorrect question. During this process, the Vampire's Daughter and the Phoenix's Daughter were naturally the focus of attention. When Madam Cook was explaining the wrong questions, Sage Cyrus and Madam Plant were giving them one-on-one tutoring. Thus, the 2 magic guide fairies quickly solved the problems exposed during the exam. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the 3 tutors gave the Vampire's Daughter and the Phoenix's Daughter their sincere blessings before saying good night to each other and leaving. After that, Dake gave out the little red flower rewards one by one. When he was about to go to sleep, Fairy EV was still shamelessly sticking to his side, using a ribbon to tightly wrap around his arm. Seeing that Fairy EV had once again gotten first place in the exam, Dake had no way of chasing it back to its small bed, so he could only hug this clingy little kitten and sleep together. Remember in 1 second. https://m. Vipkanshu. VIP. August 13th, Monday. The sky was slightly bright, and dewdrops were dripping down. Dake Dimming woke up in a hot and humid place. Fairy EV seemed to have dreamed of something delicious, sticking out its little tongue from time to lick his face, so much so that half of his face was covered in saliva. Dake couldn't help but grab it by the back of its neck, and when it opened its hazy eyes, he threw it to one side and got off the bed from the other side. The time had come, and everything was ready. After washing up, Dake sorted out all the magic guide cards including Paradise and Zoo, and woke up all the magic guide fairies. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. Most of the magic guide fairies had already developed the good habit of waking up on time. When Dake woke them up, all the magic guide fairies, except for little Snorlax, had successfully defeated the demon in the bedding. Get ready to go. Dake's voice wasn't excited, but when the magic guide fairies woke up, their slightly confused expressions immediately changed. The Shangmalian Academy had always held a special place in their hearts as the birthplace of most of the magic elves. Although their life in the Duke's mansion made them rather happy, when it came to the day of their return, their hearts were filled with unconcealable excitement. As for Snorlax, Dake stored the catnip plant into the magic card after feeding it. The sudden change of the sleeping environment made Snorlax quiver all of a sudden. Then, it immediately realized that the result of being put into the magic card was that it had lost the qualification for the last breakfast. It immediately called out anxiously from within the card. However, Dake had already stuffed it back into his card bag. By the time he arrived at the restaurant, it was already half an hour later. Although Dake had the intention to teach Snorlax a lesson, he felt a little embarrassed when he remembered that he had promised Professor Cyrus that he would give Snorlax a good meal. Therefore, he summoned Snorlax back to the cafeteria. Crack! Little Snorlax immediately grabbed the table knife and fork, revealing its ferocious face toward the food. At the main table, looking at Snorlax, Arvette couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. Then, she said in a low voice, "I'm sorry that I can't accompany you back to the academy." Dake said carelessly, "It's just a temporary trip back." Claire also said, "I'm here, aren't I? Don't worry about me." Arvette felt a little relieved and said, "I'll be there when you return to the academy at the end of August." Then, she quickly ate her meal and left in a hurry. She's getting busier and busier. Dake couldn't help but shake his head. Claire raised her finger and said, "It can't be helped." After the Demon King's execution ceremony, many hidden forces revealed themselves. As the Minister of the Kingdom Security Department, she has to lead the department to conduct a comprehensive investigation on those hidden forces and make a safety assessment. If the danger is too high, she has to lead a team to deal with it. Dake said, "Let's not think too much. When do we leave?" Claire looked up at the clock on the wall and said, "In another hour. As long as we can arrive at the academy town outside the Shangmalian Academy at night, it's not that urgent." But after only half an hour, they all appeared at the entrance of the Duke's mansion. Those who needed to ride the flying dragons were Dake, Eve, Irene, Phoenix, and Claire. The rest of the magic elves were all returned to their magic cards. "Have a safe trip." Olga folded her hands in front of her stomach and bowed to send them off. Aurora, who was beside her, also said, "Have a safe trip." "We will." With the blessings of the two girls, Dake turned around and headed to the dragon taming platform. The dragon taming guards who were directly under the Duke's mansion were already waiting there. From the beginning, they were a troop that was established to tame the flying dragons. Even though most of the time they were used to drive the dragon horn carriages, their willpower had never been worn down. Only the vast and boundless sky was their path. The dragon taming guards who stood upright beside the flying dragons were obviously different in spirit. Each of them was like a long sword that pierced through the clouds, emitting a sharp aura. But perhaps only such people could tame the flying dragons. Roar! An oppressive dragon roar suddenly rang out. The thin but real presence of the dragon's aura was instantly intimidating. Dake couldn't help but turn his head to look. The wyvern that was obviously larger than its companions was looking down at the newcomers from above. It wasn't until Claire entered its field of vision that the wyvern's eyes softened. "How is it? Is my flying dragon okay?" Claire's tone couldn't hide her pride. Although this wyvern was a spoil of war from the Demon King's army's leader during the war, after becoming her mount, It had been galloping on the battlefield without the slightest fear. It had accompanied her through the entire war. Dake came to the wyvern's side and quietly swallowed his saliva. Although they were all wyverns, the aura emitted by this wyvern made the other wyverns look like children's toys. If it wasn't for Claire, he definitely wouldn't ride this guy, because it was obviously a joke to his own life. Even so, he couldn't help but hide the flight incantation in his sleeve so that he could use it at any time. This wyvern emitted such a restless and manic aura. But when Claire caressed its body, its mood quickly calmed down, and the restless aura also became as calm as water. Dake couldn't help but sigh. Compared to those tame little lambs, it is indeed more attractive. Am I right? Claire smiled slightly. I'll bring you up. Then, she suddenly hugged Doc from behind. With a tap of her toes, she leaped into the air and sat on the wyvern's back saddle without any extra movements. Dake's face suddenly turned red. He originally thought that the so-called shared ride should be sitting behind Claire, just like when the dragon tamer guard took him to fly. But until this moment, he realized that he had misunderstood Claire's meaning. Claire's slender and powerful arms passed under his armpits, grabbed the reins on the wyvern, and then gently pulled. The wyvern, which was originally repulsed by the addition of a stranger on its back, quickly let out a whimper. At the same time, Eve, Erin, and Phoenix Lady were also brought onto the wyvern's back. Apart from Claire's wyvern, all the wyverns had passenger seats on their backs. Not only were there ankle buckles, but there was also a seat back, and every seat was secured by a safety belt. After Dake accepted the fact, he realized that Eve and Erin were also visibly nervous. On the other hand, Phoenix Lady, who was riding a wyvern for the first time, didn't show any signs of fear. Sit tight, Claire suddenly whispered in his ear. Dake's heart went numb. Then, he immediately felt a powerful ascending force. It felt as though an airplane had taken off, and he was instantly weightless. He had some experience. This time, he merely closed his eyes and his body didn't tremble. It wasn't until the wyvern flew high into the sky that the feeling of weightlessness gradually disappeared. Then, two screams suddenly sounded in his ears. Eve and Erin, who had always maintained their little adult appearances, finally revealed their 14-year-old girl's side. The twins, who rose into the sky, experienced double the joy through telepathy. Their faces were ghastly pale, and they trembled slightly in discomfort. Dake gaped and said in astonishment, "Don't tell me they have acrophobia?" "Acrophobia isn't a big deal," Claire whispered in his ear. "Facing the sky is the best treatment for acrophobia," she said and pulled the reins, causing the wyvern to flap its wings abruptly. As the wind element energy formed a barrier on the wyvern's back, the wyvern sped up and the scenery under its feet receded rapidly like the wind. This was the beginning of this journey in the sky. After all, Claire's riding skills weren't comparable to ordinary dragon tamers. Even among the Griffin Knights, it was hard to find an aerial knight who was on par with her. After the wyvern sped up, the entire flight process became unusually stable. Riding on the wyvern's back was much smoother than riding on a horse. The wind barrier parted the oncoming gales to both sides. There weren't any bumps at all. Dake had experienced the feeling of riding a wyvern for a long distance when school started, and it was completely different from today. Also, he didn't know if it was because of the flight spell, or because Claire was protecting him from behind, but he didn't have the slightest fear, and his mind was unprecedentedly clear. He began to enjoy the thrill of riding a wyvern like never before. When flying at high speed in the sky, there would be a severe deviation in the perception of time. The monotonous clouds would make people feel as if time hadn't moved at all. But when a conspicuous landmark appeared in their field of vision, they would suddenly realize that they had already flown such a long distance. The team of 4 wyverns stopped 3 times in a day. Apart from relieving the dragon tamer's exhaustion, they also needed to replenish the wyvern's food. Dake and the others took the opportunity to eat something. The places Claire chose to land were often places with pleasant scenery, which added a lot of elegance to this journey. After taking off for the 4th time, the wyverns passed through the golden sunset and arrived at dusk. Claire's wyvern was the first to land, and the other 3 wyverns followed closely behind. The 4 wyverns whizzed down from the sky, gradually slowing down, and finally landed precisely on the dragon tamer's platform in the academy town. The staff members of the academy squinted their eyes from the gusts of wind that had been stirred up. Only after all 4 dragons had landed did they familiarly walk up to the newcomers to register their identities. But when the staff saw Claire, he blurted out, "Professor," and then everything was simple. Dake and the others even stayed in the temporary residence of the staff. "I originally planned to find a guest house to stay in." Claire touched her nose and embarrassedly rejected the staff's overly enthusiastic invitation to eat. She didn't expect that in less than half a year of teaching, she would receive such a warm treatment. At this time, it was almost impossible to find an empty hotel in the small town of the academy. Only those private residences might have rooms for rent. Every year's entrance exam was a rare harvest for the town's residents. But even so, Dake and the others only obtained the right to stay in 3 rooms. The 3 dragon tamers shared a room. Eve, Irene, and the Phoenix Lady shared a room. Dake shared a room with Claire. In addition, in order to let the vampire's daughter adapt to the exam atmosphere as soon as possible, he also summoned the vampire's daughter from the magic card. Then, Claire took out a pendant from her backpack and hung it on the vampire's delicate neck. "What is this?" the vampire's daughter curiously asked. Claire gently opened the lid of the pendant, revealing the red crystal attached to it. Then, she smiled mysteriously, "Blood essence." "What is blood essence?" The vampire's daughter's eyes gradually brightened, obviously feeling the energy emitted from the pendant. Claire patiently said, "Blood essence, as the name suggests, is the essence of blood. In short, you can understand it as a clot of blood, or the aggregation of blood energy." "I see." The vampire's daughter closed her eyes and revealed a sweet smile. "I can feel my magical power recovering." Claire rubbed her head and said with a smile, "This blood essence is enough for you to use for at least 3 years. Do your best." The vampire's daughter nodded vigorously. "Okay." After they put down their luggage, they went to Eve and Irene's room. Eve and Irene, who had just alighted from the flying dragon, were obviously not in good condition. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. It's the last day, please vote. Chapter 525. Claire didn't expect that Dake wasn't the one who got dizzy, but Eve and Erin instead. But with the twins' physical strength, they recovered after resting in the room for a period of time. After confirming their physical condition, Claire said with a smile, "Don't worry about us. Have a good rest. You'll need to be present to discuss the cooperation later." Eve and Erin nodded silently and laid on the bed to recuperate. Then, Claire turned around and left with the Phoenix Lady and the vampire. "I'll bring supper for you tonight." Dake grabbed their hands and left the room with Claire. At this moment, the 3 dragon tamer guards who had settled the luggage were waiting by the door. Since the maids didn't follow them, the 3 of them were ready-made guards. As for the 4 wyverns, they were taken care of by the academy's professionals. "Let's go out and get something to eat. We can also see who has signed up this year," said Wang Yao. Claire gazed at the bustling crowd outside the window with glints flickering in her eyes. When she left the academy the day before Christmas, she didn't expect to return after just half a year. It was just that the world had changed, and when he came back, he had a different identity. She was no longer a Shang-Malian student or professor, but a student's parent instead. Since Yvette wasn't accompanying them, she was the caretaker of the Phoenix Lady and the vampire. But at the same time, she was also a businesswoman looking for cooperation. Another purpose of her visit today was to discuss the cooperation with the Academy's person in charge. It could be expected that once this cooperation was negotiated, it would build a strong bond with the Shang-Malian Academy regardless of whether it was profitable or not. Although this was not her original goal, once she had this plan, she had to take into consideration the impact it would cause. After careful analysis, she realized that the cooperation with the Shang-Malian Academy was more important than earning monetary benefits. And in terms of negotiating this cooperation, she had a unique advantage. The Academy town was brightly lit at night. Children from all over the world walked on the streets accompanied by their parents. Most of them were pure-blooded humans, and human nobles dressed in luxurious clothes could be seen everywhere. However, it was inevitable that there would be some subhumans with strange characteristics. Most of these subhumans were mixed blood, but there were also a very small number of pure-blood subhumans. There were very few subhumans among the students, but that didn't mean they didn't exist. Even some royal members of the subhuman race would apply for the Shang Malian Academy based on various considerations. However, compared to the hybrids who regarded the Shang Malian Academy as a sacred place, the pure-blood subhumans did not have that kind of extraordinary worship. Dake walked with Claire in the academy town and saw some subhumans with extraordinary temperaments at first glance. When he was in the academy, he rarely paid attention to these things. Now that he thought about it carefully, there were indeed one or two races with obvious racial characteristics. But for him, who wanted to stuff his 2 magic elves into the Shang Malian Academy, it wasn't strange for subhumans to want to enter the academy. The group of people found a random shop to sit down and eat. After they sat down, the 3 dragon tamer guards spread out to gather information. The standard of living in the academy town wasn't high, and the quality of the food in the restaurants was maintained at ordinary standards. While Dake ate, he heard people complaining about the quality of the food. He smiled and lowered his head to eat. After they were full, the group strolled around the Zhanqian Street in the academy town. The vampire and phoenix daughters had seen a lot in the King City, but they were still lively and interested in everything they saw. Therefore, they strolled until 8:30 p.m. Then, Dake bought some food and snacks and returned with the group. The 3 dragon tamer guards joined them on their way back. When they arrived at their residence, everyone was gathered. Then, the group knocked on the door of Eve and Aaron's room. "Come in." After this period of rest, the twins had apparently adjusted and their voices were full of energy. Dake pushed the door open, placed the snacks on the table, and sat down. "Are you feeling better, big sisters?" he asked with concern. "Much better." Eve got off the bed and walked to the table. On the other hand, Aaron sniffed and asked curiously, "What did you bring back? It smells so good." Dake laughed and said, "Of course it's good stuff." As he spoke, he tore open the packaging of the food and called for everyone to sit around. Then, Claire signaled for the dragon tamer guards to begin. The 3 dragon tamer guards reported the information they had gathered one by one. 15 minutes later, Dake had a preliminary understanding of this year's enrollment. According to the information collected by the dragon tamer guards, as of yesterday, the Shang Malian Academy had issued a total of 88 invitation letters. According to the past, the acceptance rate of the invitation letters was usually 100%. This meant that there were only 72 places left for this year's enrollment. However, the number of students who applied for admission to the academy town had exceeded 1,000. In other words, the passing rate of the admission test was only 7%. Picking 72 people out of 1,000 doesn't sound that straightforward. But what if you need more than 928 people? Dake tapped his fingers and said calmly. The vampire's daughter and the phoenix girl looked at each other, and the pressure that they were already under became even heavier. "Is there anyone who scares people like you?" Claire rolled her eyes at Dake and said to the 2 magic elves, "With your abilities, as long as you pass the written exam, it's basically the same as knocking on the door of the academy. The tutors have already taught you what you need to learn. So, you just need to perform normally for the written exam the day after tomorrow." Dake said, "Our Victoria is a 7-star magic elven, and Phoenix has an endless supply of magic. If you can't pass, who can?" The vampire's daughter carefully raised her head and glanced at him, then suddenly said, I'm going to read a book." "I'm going too." Phoenix girl stood up. But after standing up, she suddenly remembered that her room was here and sat down again. Dake looked at the 2 and suggested, "It's almost time tonight. You 2 should rest early. There's still a whole day to study tomorrow." The vampire Missy and Phoenix girl's expressions froze and then calmed down. Claire smiled and said, "Tell me about the special people who came to take the admission test this year." The dragon tamer immediately said, "We've investigated. Most of the important people among the nobles have already received the admission invitation. There aren't many who are taking the admission test like the two ladies. And if we expand the scope to include the commoners, there are too many of them. We can't tell who's special for now. Claire considered and said, what about the subhumans? The dragon tamer said, the subhumans are more vigilant in this environment. We only heard that the royal orcs are taking the test this time. The royal orcs? Dake blinked and said, I hope they can pass the written exam. Due to the different cultures among the races, it was actually quite difficult for the orcs to pass the Shang Malian Academy's written exam. But in any case, since they were already here, there was no point in thinking about this. They still had to do their best. Dake and the others didn't stay in the twins and Phoenix girls' room for too long. After half an hour, they left one after another and returned to their rooms. Dake yawned after returning to his room. After washing up, he summoned the trash slime and applied it on his face under Claire's slightly surprised gaze. She couldn't help but ask, do you always use it like this? Dake didn't mind and said, of course. Aunt Claire, do you want to try it? Claire reached out and touched Dake's tender face, then shook her head and said, no. No matter how strong the trash slime was at cleaning the skin, it couldn't change the fact that it could secrete acid. If she wasn't careful, she could be disfigured. After all, it wasn't her own magic fairy. She didn't want to take the risk. But after seeing how Dake used the trash slime, Claire was already planning to make a similar magic fairy. When the two came out of the bathroom, the vampire's daughter was studying seriously in front of the desk. Dake said casually, although the magic fairy doesn't need to sleep, it's still important to maintain energy. It's more important to maintain enough energy before the exam than to read 2 pages of books at the last minute. The vampire's daughter didn't even raise her head and said, I know, I'll sleep early tomorrow night. Dake, I'm telling you to sleep tonight. Dake didn't know exactly how long the vampire's daughter stayed up. Anyway, when he was woken up by his biological clock at 5 in the morning, the vampire's daughter was snuggled up to him and sleeping soundly. He carefully got up, but still woke Claire up. It's already morning? Claire opened her eyes in a daze and got up. The gradually brightening sky was blocked by thick curtains, and the room was still dark. Dake pulled open a corner of the curtains, as if bringing light into the room. Claire stood by the window with him for a while, then yawned and said, How is it? Is it stressful? Dake shrugged. It's a lot more stressful than when I took the exam myself. In the past 2 days, he had fully experienced how parents felt during the college entrance exam. Claire laughed. Relax. Even if you don't trust them, you should trust Ms. Cook and Mr. Cyrus. Dake. No, I trust them. Saying that, he walked away from the window, washed up, and got dressed. Today, in addition to continuing to collect information on the exam and taking care of the 2 magic fairies, he had to have a preliminary meeting with the person in charge of the school. The staff who temporarily lived here had already informed the school of their arrival last night. He just didn't know who would come to negotiate on behalf of the school. Now that it was the exam period, Professor Shi Erfu might not have time, so the person who came to negotiate might be the person in charge of the model Easter egg business. Dake opened the door while thinking. He couldn't do morning exercises today, but he still prepared to go out for a walk. However, as soon as he opened the door, a griffin-like elf plunged into his arms. Doc took the opportunity to pick up the little elf and turned back with a strange look in his eyes. Claire, who was walking behind him, looked down at the fairy and understood. Principal Aerti, looks like you're back, Dake said. 8:00 in the morning. Dake, Claire, and the twins had already appeared in the principal's office inside the school. Cynthia St. Aerti personally poured tea and said kindly, I heard that Yalvita submitted 2 applications, so I came half a month in advance. Are they 2 magic fairies? Dake, yes, 2 humanoid magic fairies. Have you solved the problem of surviving outside? Aerti asked in concern. Dake nodded slightly. For now, it's solved. Arte smiled and said, Then I won't ask too much about the issue of intelligence. Do you need me to open a small door? Dake opened his mouth and couldn't help but say, How can you be so direct? If they really can't pass, then I can only say that they're not suitable for the school. Not completely. However, Principal Aerti shook his head. After all, that vampire's daughter was refined less than half a year ago. I also want to know how far a magic fairy can go on the path of magic. Special cases are special. Dake shrugged. Half a year is enough. Claire interjected, let's talk about the cooperation first. Principal Aerti changed the topic and said, I've seen your letter. Do you want to reach an in-depth cooperation with the school regarding the expansion of the model Easter egg? Yes, Claire said, like the model Easter egg, it's also an idea proposed by Dake. Once it's tested, the influence of Shang-Molian Academy will spread to the whole nation. Principal Aerti couldn't help but frown. Tell me about it. Claire's lips curled up. She knew that she had piqued the principal's interest. She then explained the plan for the duel game, in simple terms. The plan itself wasn't complicated. As long as they knew the idea, they could develop it on their own even if the school abandoned them. However, Claire knew very well that the Shang-Molian Academy wouldn't do that. In terms of morality, there was no other partner that could compete with them. Sure enough, after Principal Aerti heard the idea, he didn't have the slightest intention of developing it on his own. He said directly, to simplify the high threshold of magic duels into a duel game that everyone can participate in through cards and dueling discs. This is a genius idea. Let me think about it. She picked up a pen and began to deduce on a piece of paper. Any kind of entertainment that could be used by the whole nation would have a meaning beyond the entertainment itself. Mastering this kind of entertainment was equivalent to mastering a tool to convey ideas to the whole nation. What's more, this was a bold attempt to popularize the magical engineering technology. Following the tide of the times, unveiling the mysterious veil and making magic and magic no longer feared was one of the original intentions of the school to participate in the promotion of magic duels. Now, there seemed to be a better way. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. Requesting votes. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.